Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Izuku becomes a hunter to get a quirk. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Some individuals, it is true, are more special. This is natural selection. It begins as a single individual born or hatched like every other member of their species. Anonymous. Seemingly ordinary. Except they're not. They carry inside them the genetic code that will take their species to the next evolutionary rung. It's destiny. That is until something extraordinary happened. In the city of Quirk, China, a newborn baby was discovered that could emanate from their body. This baffled many doctors and scientists around the world. After that, people from around the world started to use strange abilities. Scientists couldn't understand why this was happening. However, one scientist could only theorize the quirk phenomenon was the cause of evolution. Natural selection. As time went by, ordinary became the extraordinary, the supernatural became the natural. Soon normal people weren't normal. Now 80% of world's population possess these abilities called quirks, while 20% are quirkless. One of whom is Izuku's story follows. A boy who thought he was quirkless since he was 4 years old. He'd been bullied by everyone and looked down upon because of this. Even by his best friend, now turned bully Kasuki Bakugo. However, as time went by, when everything seemed hopeless, the boy, Izuku Midoriya, found out he did in fact had a quirk that could let him understand things, even very complex things. He could find any problem and fix it or make sense of it. Like a malfunctioning car engine, a clock, or even an advanced mathematical problem. He could even understand how people worked, how they ticked. And on that same fateful day, just as he was about to get mugged by some lowlife after heading back home from school, Izuku found out he could understand quirks, that he could copy them. All he had to do was just grab a person's head and look into their eyes. After doing so, he could see everything. Their dreams, desires, fears, and so many other things. And what made their quirk work. He could understand any quirk, its drawbacks and strengths. Unfortunately, at a cost. The mugger that attacked Izuku went limp. He left that mugger brain dead. A vegetable. His eyes lifeless. Shocked and horrified by what he did, Izuku ran home. Like his life depended on it. When he got home, Izuku completely locked himself in his room, worrying his mom greatly. Eventually, Izuku managed to calm down and tried to figure out what was happening. But as he did this, he found out yet another shocking discovery. He had another quirk completely identical to the mugger's. All night Izuku wondered how and why. When he suddenly realized what his quirk could do. After finding out everything and making sense of it all, Izuku felt regret and fear. But what happened? What he did. So much so that he wondered if he should tell his mom and turn himself in. But something stopped him. Izuku came to realize he could finally achieve his dream. He could be a hero. Like All Might. If the authorities or pro-heroes found out what he did, they would lock him up or send somewhere he would never be able to achieve his dream. Or see his mom or Kakin again. He couldn't let that happen. So he kept quiet and tried to forget what happened. For weeks it tore him up to lie to his mom. To lie about him having a quirk, 2 quirks. It burned him a little to still get bullied. But Izuku powered through it. His plan was originally to wait until he graduates, so he could apply to UA High School. The place where All Might and so many other heroes were once taught at. Where he could be closer to reaching his dream. Unfortunately, as time went by, he found out his quirk had an unsettling side effect. He craved more. More power. He needed more quirks. He needed to know more, have more. Izuku tried his best to figure out what was wrong. But as his hunger grew, he started to look at his mom, Kakin, and anyone with a quirk differently. He was afraid what he might do if this hunger didn't stop. He couldn't tell his mom or anyone. Not if he wanted to risk everything. So with a heavy heart, he did the only thing he could do. He gave in to his hunger. But he promised to not use it on anyone he cared for or anyone innocent. No, he would target people who deserved it. The thugs, thieves, rapists, and other scum. No one would care. They didn't deserve such gifts in the first place. Izuku knew it's not what any hero would have done. Something All Might wouldn't have done. But he didn't want to hurt the ones he loved. He didn't have a choice. So, Izuku stalked the streets hunting and feeding his hunger. Thankfully, he managed to control his hunger for at least a little while. He only had to hunt a couple of weeks. As months went by, the time for graduation grew close. And so was the time to apply to UA High School. Sadly, on a normal night, the night he would hunt, everything came crashing down. When he almost crossed the line, when he almost broke the promise he made to himself. All because of his hunger. The people he looked up to and dreamed of becoming finally found him. Apparently his victims has caught the attention of pro-heroes and police. And that's where our story begins. Musatafu, Japan at night. It was a cool and calm night. Something that wasn't too strange. After all, it was Musatafu City. Home to many heroes and where UA High School was. Where the next generation of heroes would be taught at. However, even with all of that, crime was still a thing. And not too long ago Musatafu had a bit of crime. That is until something strange was happening. People were being found in a brain-dead state. who were mostly thugs and other scum. Many thought it was a hero or vigilante setting up shop. But it wasn't. It had gotten so bad that many lowlifes and scum were leaving the city in droves, not wanting to end up like the people who were found. The police and heroes thought it had to be a vigilante, but they didn't have any solid evidence. The locals and lowlifes came up with a name for this person: the stalker. While things seemed quiet and peaceful, normal people were still afraid to go out at night. Even though it seemed this stalker had his eyes on lowlifes and other scum, no one wanted to take that chance. Unfortunately for one person, they had to brave the night. A woman around her later early 40s was walking home. She had long dark hair which was tied into a bow tie from behind. She was wearing a simple sweater and had blush marks on her cheeks. She seemed to have a somewhat frog-like appearance. She looked to be carrying shopping bags of some kind. This woman appeared to be nervous walking around at night, especially considering the rumors she's heard. But she needed to pick up some stuff and medicine at the local 24-hour store. It was for her youngest daughter. She's been having a terrible sore throat, and she wanted to do something about, like any mother would do. Her eldest daughter, husband and son didn't want her to go alone, but she convinced them she would be alright. Still though, she did feel nervous walking the semi-lit streets alone. It almost felt like she was being watched. Thankfully she was almost home. Suddenly a loud noise caught her off guard that made her gasp in shock and fear. She quickly turned around to see a bent and broken can rolling on the ground towards her. She started to shake a little in fear when she noticed something moving in the shadows. Who's there? The woman fearfully croaked out with a slight ribbit. She didn't get a response, which only made her fear grow. That is until something small jumped out the shadows. It was a small black cat, who gave out a soft meow. The woman breathed out a sigh of relief. It was only a cat. The woman softly said with a small ribbit. She then turned around to resume heading home. That is until she came face to face with something that frightened the daylights out of her. Standing a few feet away from her was a person. This person was around 5 or 6 tall. This person looked to be a man, but she could really tell because of what they were wearing. This person was wearing a long black trench coat and a black t-shirt. He or she was also wearing a light baseball cap, light gray jeans and oversized red shoes. The woman couldn't see their face because of the darkness. But she didn't have to. She knew who this person was. The stalker, who started to slowly walk towards her. "I'm not going to scream, if that's what you're hoping for," the woman shaking stated in a brave tone. As the stalker got closer, he began to raise his hand. Suddenly the woman froze in place, like something was stopping her from moving, mostly likely the stalker's quirk. "What do you want?" The stalker remained silent as he stopped right in front of her. The woman was afraid, very afraid. But she kept calm as she tightened her grip on her shopping bags. "Please don't do this." The woman tried to yell out but couldn't find the strength. The stalker didn't say a word as he began to reach his hands towards her face. Not knowing what was going to happen, the woman closed her eyes tightly, expecting the worst to come. Her thoughts then went to her family. "Please, I have a family." That's when the stalker stopped, his hand only a few inches away from the woman's face. When she opened her, she saw the stalker shaking, along with his hand, like he was trying to stop himself from doing something. Shortly after that, the woman felt her strength coming back. And the stalker groaned out in a strained, low voice, shocking the woman. Before she could say or do anything, a sudden and unseen force pushed her away. That's when she noticed the stalker extended his other hand just before it happened. "I said run." The woman flinched in fear from the stalker's voice. She quickly turned around and started to run away, like her life depended, which it might have, leaving the dark and mysterious figure all alone. The stalker suddenly fell to their knees as he yelled out in pain. He kept on shaking, like he was having a seizure or something. He then used one hand to tightly grab hold of his other hand's wrist, like he was stopping it from doing something. "Why is this happening to me?" the stalker asked himself with a pain-filled voice. The stalker eventually stopped shaking, but remained in the same state he was in, his head lowered in what looked to be shame. "And so this is the infamous stalker. I was expecting so much more." The stalker quickly got up and turned around where he heard the voice. That's when he saw a man, a slender man of average height with messy, shoulder-length black hair that partially hangs in front of his face with half-open black eyes. He had a rugged and worn-out appearance with a bored or tired expression. Probably both. He sported a ragged black outfit that consisted of a long-sleeved shirt and matching pants that were tucked into his boots. He also wore a utility belt and a rather tall and large scarf. He was currently wearing a pair of large yellow goggles for some reason. "Who are you?" the stranger just sighed. "Doesn't matter who I am. All you need to know is that I'm here to take you in," the stranger stated, rather bored with what was happening. "Now are you going to come quietly or make this difficult?" The stalker tensed up. His worst fears had happened. He had caught the attention of the pro-heroes. Maybe even the police too. He knew something like this would happen. He hoped that it wouldn't. The stalker knew almost every pro-hero in Japan, but he didn't recognize this man. "You really don't want to do this?" the stalker warned the stranger in a low and serious tone. "Please. I don't want to hurt anyone, especially a hero." The stranger gave a light chuckle as he smiled at the stalker strangely. Sure. Like how you weren't going to hurt that woman. The stalker clenched his fist tightly as he glared at the hero, which only made him smile more. You have a whole list of victims, stalker. At least 9 people, all of whom you've left brain dead. I don't know if you're doing this for fun or because of your view of justice, but it ends tonight. The stranger quickly launched a part of his scarf towards the stalker, who would have dodged or deflected it away, but something stopped him. Like he couldn't activate his quirk. He was too late as he felt the scarf wrap around him. He tried to break free but to no avail. That's when he realized why. A steel wire alloy woven carbon nanofiber scarf. Never seen those before. Only heard stories about them. And who they're used by. The stalker stated softly as he stopped struggling. You're Eraserhead, the pro hero who hates the media. Also a hero who could nullify quirks just by looking at that person. Quite an amazing quirk you have there. Eraserhead just scoffed. Looks like this punk knew a bit about him. Unfortunately such a quirk has drawbacks. The stalker stated rather seriously and in a matter-of-fact tone, getting Eraserhead's attention. Your quirk is called Erasure. It's a rather powerful quirk, but is useless when your sight is unstructured and deactivates if you blink. It's able to nullify emitter and transformation quirks, but isn't effective against mutant quirks. It also gives you one bad case of dry eye. Eraserhead was shocked. How did this punk know that? Only few people know about that. Stalker eyes looked all over Eraserhead, like he was studying him. Your name is also Shota Izuku, isn't it? Eraserhead's eyes widened in shock as he tensed up. How did he know that? How did he know these things? Does he have a telepathic quirk? Who are you? Eraserhead asked dead serious as he glared at the mysterious stalker with his quirk activated. And how do you know these things? The stalker stood there silent for a while, but just long enough so Eraserhead could blink. And when he did, the stalker just sighed. Someone you should have left alone. The stalker suddenly took a deep breath and then blew out a large black haze from his mouth, surprising Eraserhead. Before he could tighten or pull his scarf, it all of a sudden went limp, like it wasn't holding something anymore. Soon the black haze reached Eraserhead, causing him to jump away while covering his mouth and nose with his scarf. Eraserhead saw Stalker rushing out of the large haze right towards him, while still blowing out that haze put of his mouth. The pro hero acted quickly and activated his quirk, shutting down Stalker's haze quirk. He was then about to launch his scarf to immobilize him again. However, Stalker saw it coming and with a flick of his hand, he pushed it away while midair. What? Eraserhead couldn't believe it. This punk had 2 quirks. Before Eraserhead could react, he was suckered punch in the face by Stalker, causing him to fall on his butt. It didn't hurt, but it sure surprised him. Stalker then quickly rushed past, running like hell. Damn it. Eraserhead cursed out with a growl as he got up and chased after the punk. Get back here. Stalker ran like his life depended on it. Which it did, of course. He couldn't get caught by anyone unless he wanted to lose everything he's worked hard for. He needed to lose this guy. But it looked like that wasn't going to happen. Stalker looked over his shoulder to see Eraserhead gaining on him. He was using his damn scarf to grab a hold of anything to swing off it, like a damn monkey or spider. Come on. As Stalker kept on running, he noticed he was heading towards an alleyway with a dead end, which made Eraserhead smile. There was no way out this punk was escaping. But Eraserhead stopped smiling when he saw something unbelievable. Just as he was near the dead end, Stalker performed a massive jump. So massive that he perfectly landed on top of the building's roof. That's not possible. Eraserhead said in shock and disbelief. There's no way someone can have that many quirks. Eraserhead quickly launched himself in the air, and then he threw a part of his scarf up towards the roof. When he caught a hold of something, he used all his strength to pull himself up. When he got up on the roof, he saw Stalker running and jumping across the rooftops. Shit. Eraserhead then resumed his chase as he ran after Stalker, running and jumping across rooftops just like him. Stalker looked over his shoulder to see that he was still being pursued. As he was looking over, he failed to notice a fast approaching figure coming right at him. When he looked, he was too late. The figure punched him right in the face. Stop right there, villain. Before Stalker knew what hit him, he was sent falling down towards a busy crowded street, with cars going back and forth along with people walking about. Something Eraserhead and the figure didn't want to happen. Oh, damn it, Kamui Woods. Eraserhead yelled out as he got closer and closer. Catch him. The figure, Kamui Woods, wore a black unitard with a wood helmet, wooden gloves that reached past his forearm, a wooden belt, and wooden shoes. He was an up-and-coming hero. A rookie. But that didn't mean he was weak or didn't have an interesting quirk. Got it. Kamui Woods yelled out as he summoned wood and branches from out his hand that were heading towards Stalker, hoping to catch him and immobilize him. You're mine. As Stalker flew through the air, he saw the wood and branches coming at him, his eyes analyzing everything from Kamui Woods to his quirk. He then sighed. Would a? Stalker asked out loud as the wood got closer and closer towards him. But just as it was about to grab a hold of him, an emerald-like fire appeared out nowhere and engulfed his entire left hand. Sorry, Kamui Woods, but I got you beat. Forgive me. Then with a loud yell, Stalker extended his hand towards Kamui Woods. As his hand shot out fire like a flamethrower, Kamui Woods, who barely had enough time to deactivate his quirk and dodge the flames. What the hell? Kamui Woods exclaimed in shock. The rumors said he would have an immobilizing or telekinetic quirk. He does. Eraserhead yelled out as he ducked down to avoid any flames heading at him. He has 3 quirks. What? While he had the heroes preoccupied, Stalker tried to figure a way out this situation. He didn't have a teleportation quirk to get himself out of here. He was running out of options. He got closer to the street. It looked like he was going to land hard in the middle of the road. He didn't have a choice. He had to use the quirk. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Just as Stalker was about to hit the road, his whole skin and face quickly turned into stone. Crash. Cars on the road stopped and so did the people on the sidewalks. They looked to where they all heard that crash and saw dust in the air. Then, like something from out of a movie, Stalker arose from a small crater he made. His skin still stone. He started to dust himself. What's going on? Oh my god. Is it a villain attack? Stalker took a look around to see that everyone had their eyes on him. People from all walks of life, ages and genders looking on at him. Those in vehicles on the road stopped to get a look what was happening. A few people were even recording or taking pictures on their cell phones. All of this wasn't supposed to happen. All Stalker wanted was to stop his hunger. He didn't want to hurt or scare that woman. Thankfully he stopped himself before anything bad had happened. Sadly he was still in a huge mess. He didn't have the right quirk to get out this situation. Out all of the ones he copied stole, he was still useless. Look. It's Kamui Woods and some other hero. A random bystander called out pointing up at a nearby building. Stalker and everyone looked up to see Eraserhead and Kamui Woods looking down. Right at Stalker, who sighed heavily. Stop right there, villain. Kamui Woods yelled out in a very proud and loud voice. He then jumped down onto the sidewalk. You shall not take any more victims, Stalker. After Kamui Woods said that, everyone began to talk and whisper among each other. That's the Stalker. Did Kamui Woods say villain? I thought the Stalker only took out thugs and other lowlifes. Go get him, Kamui Woods. You can do it. Teach that no good villain a lesson. Kamui Woods felt his chest swell up with pride. Hearing the people talk about him and cheering him on made him happy. Eraserhead shook his head with a groan. He really did want to catch unwanted attention, especially if this reached the media. But he had to bring this punk in. He was too dangerous to let free. And it looked like Kamui Woods wouldn't be able to handle him alone. As the cheers kept on going for the heroes and the boos and jeers for Stalker, it was starting to get to him. His hunger, it needed be fed. But the only ones nearby are innocents or heroes. Stalker started to clench his fists and teeth. He had to fight the surge. But he couldn't. He wasn't strong enough. Kamui Woods and Eraserhead saw this. Eraserhead knew something was up with this punk. He was different, he acted different. Like he was fighting control for his body. And he was losing. While this was happening, Kamui Woods saw this as an opportunity to end this. Now is my chance. Kamui Woods yelled out as started to activate his quirk. His arm began morph into wood branches and shot out at Stalker in all directions. Stalker just stood there as the branches got closer. Then out of nowhere he began to smile like a maniac. Lacquered chains prison. But before Kamui Woods' attack reached Stalker, a giant and sudden kick sent Stalker flying. Right into a car. Thankfully no one was in the car, but it was completely totaled on impact. And Stalker laid there motionless on the bent and wrecked up front. Fortunately for him he activated his stone quirk, so he wasn't hurt too bad. But it looked like he was going to get for a while. Cannon. The heroes and bystanders looked to see a woman with long, voluminous blonde hair curled into 2 strands and purple eyes with white pupils. And she was gigantic. Her costume was composed of a purple and cream-colored skin-tight bodysuit that is accented with orange stripes. Her bodysuit also had 3 peculiar orange diamond-shaped dots on the purple top that were located under her chest. She also wore a purple domino mask with horn-like protrusions on the sides. This woman was Mount Lady. An up-and-coming hero just like Kamui Woods. Eraserhead, Kamui Woods and everyone couldn't believe what had just happened. Meanwhile Mount Lady got off up the ground and smiled and did a pose. Hello everyone. Mount Lady exclaimed out loud proud as she posed for anyone recording or taking pictures. Your hero has arrived. Soon people started to cheer. Many started taking pictures of Mount Lady. All of whom were men. While Eraserhead and Kamui Woods were still reeling from what happened. Eventually Kamui Woods lowered his head in depression and shame. While Eraserhead sighed as he face-palmed. This is why I prefer working alone. Eraserhead, or Aizawa as his friends called him, sighed. He then looked over to where Stalker was. He still looked unconscious. Thankfully Mount Lady didn't kill him. That attack of hers is overkill sometimes. At least we got the job done. Aizawa then brought his attention back at Mount Lady, who was getting everyone's attention. He shook his head in disapproval. While everyone had their attention on Mount Lady, everyone including the heroes failed to notice Stalker was beginning to move. Thank you all. I just want to say, well, I've only been an active hero for a short time. I'm happy I was able to catch the infamous Stalker before Mount Lady could finish and before she and everyone knew it. The car door was thrown and struck her square on the face. The force was hard enough to make her yelp in pain and force her down on one knee. She held where she was hit and moaned in pain. Everyone looked over to where the car door came from and saw Stalker, still in his stone form. He was standing up on top of the wrecked car while carrying another car door like it was nothing. He quickly smiled as he saw everyone's shocked and horrified faces. "That's an awesome quirk," Stalker stated in a very awestruck and unnaturally kind tone. His smile then turned into a twisted one as he eyed Mount Lady strangely. "I can't wait to try it. After I take it from you." Before anyone knew it, Eraserhead and Kamui Woods leapt or ran towards Stalker, with the intent to take him down. Stalker sighed once again. He just about had enough of this. "Stop!" Stalker yelled out as he raised his free hand. Suddenly both Aizawa and Kamui Woods stopped, frozen in midair. They were shocked at first, just like everyone who saw. But they quickly tried to struggle or use their quirks, only to find out they couldn't. "Can't use your quirks, can you?" Both pro-heroes looked to see Stalker smiling at them. He then raised hand higher, which caused Aizawa and Kamui Woods to be risen too. "I call this quirk Pacify. It's almost like telekinesis mixed with your Erasure quirk, Eraserhead. This is one of the first quirks I took. Pretty handy," Stalker explained, still smiling. He then motioned his hand to bring Aizawa and Kamui Woods closer. Which it did. Stalker leaned right in their faces. "Unfortunately I can't use it for long. Usually this how I catch my prey, and I would have their quirk by now. And I'd be home with my mom. No fuss no muss. But you two and my morals made me miss my dinner. Now I'm going to have to deal with you two first before I feed. So bye." And with that, Stalker flicked his hand and sent the two heroes fast into a building. Aizawa was sent through a window, breaking it and sending broken glass everywhere. Kamui Woods wasn't too lucky and hit the hard concrete building's outside wall. When hitting the wall, a nasty crunch was heard, and Kamui Woods screamed in pain. "Hhhh. This caused many onlookers to gasp, scream or run in fear. Children who were present held onto their parents and looked away in fear. Many women yelled or screamed in horror. Men just stood there helpless and afraid. A couple people ran away too, not wanting to be next or see what was going on. Few wanted to be brave and help, but couldn't because of their fear." As Kamui Woods continued to scream in pain, Stalker groaned in annoyance. "It didn't have to be this way. But you left me no choice," Stalker stated in a low tone with a light frown. He then noticed Mount Lady beginning to get up. And she looked very mad. "Please stay down. No more people have to get hurt. Please." Mount Lady glared at Stalker with all her might. "I'm gonna make you pay for what you did to them." Mount Lady yelled out as she leaped right at Stalker, with her gained fist raised. "You bastard." Stalker sighed. Looked like this was going to be troublesome. He couldn't use his pacify since he already used it, and overusing it would only hurt him. He decided to rely on his other quirks. "Here." Stalker yelled out as she threw the car door he was holding at Mount Lady. She quickly shielded her face, expecting it to hit her there. But she was wrong as it hit leg hard. She yelled out in pain and fell to one knee again, giving Stalker his chance. "You're mine." Stalker quickly raised his other hand and balled into a fist. He then pointed right at Mount Lady, who kept on charging right at him. Just as she was about to reach him, he opened his hand, and a wave of sound was fired at Mount Lady. That sounded like a high pitch of something. She immediately stopped and fell to the ground on her knees. "Hhhh. Mount Lady tried to shield her ears but was too late. She wallowed and screamed in pain. She began to get a bloody nose and was getting dizzy and tired. Something Stalker noticed. "That's it. Go to sleep. I promise you won't feel a thing," Stalker said somewhat softly as he slowly walked over to Mount Lady, who couldn't do a thing. "Forgive me. But it's either you or any one of these innocent bystanders. Please understand I don't have a choice." As Stalker got closer and closer to Mount Lady, the giant of a woman felt fear and anger, but anger above anything. So much that she powered through the pain and tried to attack Stalker with a massive right hook punch. Fortunately for Stalker, he saw the attack coming and used his enhanced jumping quirk to avoid it. He had to stop using his sound emission though. Unfortunately, while Stalker avoided the attack, Mount Lady couldn't stop herself until it was too late. Her massive fist collided with a nearby rundown building. She punched a hole right through the building, sending debris and causing the building to shake. "Oh crap." Mount Lady yelled out as she tried to pull her fist out of the building. While completely unaware, she was sending debris down to innocent bystanders, who all scrambled to get out of the way. She kept on trying to break free, causing the building to shake even more. "Come on." Stalker looked on at the scene in shock. What was she doing? She was making the whole building unstable. He saw people running or panicking. His eyes then laid on a woman trying to shield her child from the falling debris, which caused her to get struck by a piece of debris that knocked her out, making her fall onto her child. "Mommy." The child yelled out as he tried to wake her up or push her off, but to no avail. "Mommy, wake up." Stalker didn't why, but something clicked inside him. Seeing that woman get hurt and seeing her and that child in danger did something to him. Like his need to help outweigh his need to feed. That's when everything made sense now. He did this, he hurt the heroes and placed all these people in danger. He was a villain. Guilt and anguish filled his heart. Mount Lady was panicking, which only made her try to pull her hand out even more, only further shaking the building. It would only be a matter of until the building would collapse, and then fall down onto the knocked-out woman and her child. Stalker knew that he had to stop that from happening. At any cost. He had to make up for his mistake, all of his mistakes. Finally, the worst possible outcome happened. Mount Lady pulled her hand out of the building. She smiled very proudly, but that smile turned into a face of horror when she realized what she did. The old and abandoned building began to break up and collapse. All of it directed at the unconscious woman, her child and few others who wouldn't be able to run away in time. No? Mount Lady yelled out as she tried to reach and grab as many people she could. But before that happened, Stalker rushed past Mount Lady at inhuman speeds. His baseball cap was gone as he threw it away, revealing his hair and face to the world. Stalker had messy dark green hair with black highlights, his eyes were green, and his cheeks had a few freckles too. He looked like a kid. Probably no older than 14 or 15. And that's not what shocked everyone. It's what he did next that did. Stalker ran right under the falling building and raised his hands in the air. Stop. Stalker yelled out, activating his pacify quirk. But instead of using it on people, he was using it on the collapsing building and debris, making them freeze in midair. Everyone couldn't believe it. This person, who attacked and injured 2 pro heroes, was saving people. Stalker looked down at the people he saved, with a stressed and strained expression. Run. The bystanders were still looking confused and shocked. None of them bothering to move. I said run. I can't hold this forever. Stalker yelled out. Go. Now. Not wanting to make him to repeat himself. Everyone under the frozen collapsing building scrambled to get out of the way and ran for their lives. All except for the unconscious woman and her kid, who looked at Stalker, reaching his hand out with a frightened and pleading face. Stalker fell on his knees, his nose started to bleed. His pacify quirk wasn't supposed to last this long or hold this many things at once. But he had to. For that kid and his mom. He slowly turned his head around to look up at Mount Lady, with a strained and pleading face. Save them. Stalker yelled out as he felt his strength leaving him. Mount Lady looked shocked at first, but quickly nodded. Now. Mount Lady immediately reached out and carefully grabbed the child and his mother, who was starting to wake up. The giant quickly pulled them out of harm's way, leaving only Stalker holding up the fallen building and debris. The child he and Mount Lady saved couldn't help but look at him. It wasn't a look of fear or hate, but a look of admiration and gratefulness. The look that someone would give a hero. That's all Stalker needed to see. Everyone was safe, all except him. With a strained yet relieved smile. Of all the mistakes he's made, it made him swell with happiness and gratefulness. Still, though, it was too late. With a sigh, Stalker deactivated his quirk, releasing the falling building and debris. All aimed at him. Mount Lady, the child and many others could only look on in horror. Mount Lady quickly rushed to try and save Stalker. Unfortunately, she wouldn't make in time. Well, everyone could only look on. Azawa, who had recovered from getting thrown through a window with a few scrapes and cuts, had jumped out of the broken window to look on at Stalker with a confused expression. The same with Kamui Woods. They stopped screaming. The young man known as Stalker just sadly smiled as he looked up at the collapsing building and debris coming at him. There was no way out of this. None of the quirks he's collected the last couple of months could help. Maybe 1 or 2, but he was too weak. He strained himself too much. This was it. The end. Maybe this is for the best. I caused so much pain and hurt too many people. Attacked the people I'd admired since I could walk. I deserve this. Stalker thought, still smiling as everything seemed to slow down around him. His thoughts went to his mother and other people he cared for. Which was a really short list. Looks like you were right, Kakin. I'll never be a hero after all. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I'm not the son you wanted, I'm just a monster. Stalker then smiled as he remembered he saved that child and his mom and so many other people. Not bad for a monster. At least he would die knowing he did something right. And with that, the vigilante villain known as the Stalker closed his eyes, awaiting the end. But just as the debris and building were about to hit him, a loud swoosh was heard, and Stalker felt someone or something grab him. Swoosh. Stalker opened his eyes to see what happened, and he was shocked beyond belief to see he was in the arms of someone. Someone who saved him from getting crushed. But what shocked him more was the fact who saved him. The person who saved him was an extremely large man with a very tall and overly muscular figure. He had short blonde hair with 2 distinct bangs that stood up over his head. His hair casted a dark shadow over his face, hiding everything but his deep blue eyes. He wore a skin-tight blue bodysuit decorated with a red symbol that somewhat resembled a Y. The symbol was designed with a white diamond at its center, with white lines connected to it that trace from the man's chest to his back shoulders. The lines looked to be trimmed with the aforementioned red symbol. The symbol appeared to have wings on the sides that ran from atop his torso before ending around to his back. Over his back was a similar red and white design absent to the white diamond. Large white patches with red trims covered each side of his hips before ending at his lower thighs. He also wore a gold belt that had a silver buckle with red eyes. His forearm sleeves were colored in gold that each had white lines covered in blue accents over his wrists. He had spiked fins on the sides of his arms, and his feet were covered in shin-length gold boots trimmed with white and red accents. Stalker knew who this man was. Everyone knew. This man was the world's symbol of peace. He was the #1 hero of Japan. The same man Stalker strived to become. A true hero. All Might. Have no fear. All Might stated with a booming and righteous voice. His smile was big and bright that would make his enemies fear him, and give his allies and citizens hope. For I am here. Have no fear. All Might stated with a booming and righteous voice. His smile was big and bright that would make his enemies fear him, and give his allies and citizens hope. For I am here. An hour later, Musatafu City Police Headquarters. In a small cell, deep in police headquarters. The vigilante villain known as the Stalker was cuffed and heavily chained. Sitting on a metal chair next to a toilet and small bed. That wasn't all. 2 cameras were also watching his every move too. Also with a heavily armored and armed guard, who looked somewhat nervous. The police usually don't do this unless the proper offender was a serious villain. Which the Stalker was apparently. It had been an hour since the incident happened. Where Stalker lost control and had a fight with 3 pro heroes. Easily beating them and having them at his mercy. An hour since he endangered countless civilians. An hour since he saved the lives of those he endangered. An hour since he was saved and apprehended by All Might. His hero. By now word would have gotten to the media. On what happened, and probably who he was. Stuff like that wouldn't be difficult for the media to find out. The police probably knew everything about him by now. They might be calling his mom and telling her what happened. What he did. Stalker sighed, making the guard tense. His life was over. His dreams and goals were gone with the wind. Everyone in Japan probably knew who was and what he was. A villain, a monster. Still though, deep down he was kind of happy. No one got hurt, well not killed anyways by his crazed hunger. He saved a few people too. He even got to meet his hero All Might. Even though he was the one who cuffed him and brought him to the police. But he was still a little down, more scared than anything. Not about him, well maybe a little. No, he was afraid for his mom. What was she going to do when she found out what happened? What he is? Stalker couldn't imagine. He didn't want to. As Stalker continued to think about his mom and his fate. A door could be heard opening, then shutting. He then heard 2 sets of footsteps walking. Finally 2 people appeared from around the corner outside his cell. One was the police officer who All Might handed over to. He had a kind yet serious face. He was a tall man with short black hair and black eyes. As a member of the police force, he was wearing his uniform. He wore a signature tan overcoat and a matching hat. The other person was a sickly and very skinny man with angular features and long limbs. He had spiky, disheveled hair with 2 bangs framing the sides of his face. He had a very long neck and his eyebrows were absent. He wore some baggy clothes. This man looked familiar to Stalker, but he couldn't figure out why. Both men stopped in front of Stalker's cell. The officer holding onto a clipboard and the other just standing there, looking at Stalker strangely. Izuku Midoriya Aka the Stalker, middle schooler for Oridera Junior High School. Age 14, mother's name is Inko Midoriya, and father's name is Hisashi Midoriya. No criminal record to speak of. Well, used to anyway. And yet I only see one thing wrong on this board. You know what that is. Stalker, now known to be Izuku Midoriya, just sat there. With a look of shame, he remained quiet, making the officer sigh. It says here you're quirkless. And yet you not only showed you have a quirk, but you have 7. The officer stated, eyeing Izuku suspiciously. The other did the same. Izuku remained quiet, his eyes stared at the men with indifference. Tell us, how did that happen? And why you're hunting people with quirks? How many do you have that you haven't shown? Izuku just remained quiet. That is until he looked up at the men. Is everyone alright? Both men were surprised by what Izuku said. They looked over at each other. The sickly-looking man gave a nod to officer who nodded back. Mount Lady and Eraserhead were hurt, but not too badly. A few civilians got a couple scrapes and bruises. The only who was seriously hurt was Kamui Woods. He suffered a broken leg and dislocated shoulder. Izuku's eyes widened in shock, then in horror as he lowered his head, which confused both men and the guard. But what happened next changed their confusion into shock. Izuku began to cry. Tears began to slowly fall towards the floor and down his face. His expression was filled with guilt and shame. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Izuku softly sobbed out as he tried to keep himself together. The hunger, I can't stop it. No matter what I do, it's always there. God, I'm a monster. Everyone looked at Izuku strangely again. What hunger? The sickly man asked. Son, we can't help you unless you help us. Tell us what's wrong. How did you receive those quirks? Do you know anyone else like you? All these questions, the sickly man needed to know. The officer stayed quiet as he waited for Izuku to say something. However, Izuku just sat there with his head still low. That is until he eventually looked up to face the man. With a very dark look. There's no else like me, I'm a monster. Izuku murmured darkly as closed his eyes. Whatever charges you have on me, I'll accept them. Just please leave me alone. The sickly man didn't look like he was ready to leave. But before he could say anything, the officer stopped him, giving him a small shake of his head. The sickly man just sighed and nodded. The officer turned around to give the guard a nod, who gave a small salute. Both men were about to leave, but stopped when Izuku decided to speak once last time. "I'm sorry, tell everyone I'm sorry," Izuku softly whispered out. "Especially my mom." Both men looked shocked by this, then resumed walking away. However, the sickly man gave Izuku a sympathetic glance before leaving. Soon Izuku was all alone again. The guard and cameras watching over him like a hawk. He could break out of here, use any one of his quirks, but he decided to stay like this. He deserved it. At least until the hunger came back. It always comes back. A monster, that's all he was. Meanwhile, as Izuku wallowed in guilt and shame in his cell, the two men who had just gotten done talking to him were discussing recent events, namely about what happened in Izuku. "So, All Might, what are you thinking about?" the officer asked the sickly man, now known to be All Might. "Do you think this kid has anything to do with you-know-who?" All Might just sighed. "I don't know, Tsukauchi. That boy used multiple quirks just like him. So maybe." All Might murmured out with conflicted face. Tsukauchi looked over at his friend worryingly. "Still, what I saw that boy do. I'm still having trouble that someone involved with One for All would risk everything for innocent people. That boy saved those people without a second thought. He even worked willingly with the people he was fighting with." Tsukauchi nodded. Why would Izuku risk his life for a couple of civilians? Why did he care? From all the stories and rumors about the stalker, one would think Izuku would make an escape during the chaos. But he didn't. He stayed and revealed his identity to help and save people, even going so far to risk his life. Why though? What do you think he was talking about in there? About hunger? Tsukauchi asked All Might. Do you think that's why he's after quirks? I've never heard of such quirk before. That's when All Might stopped, causing Tsukauchi to stop as well. The detective looked over at his friend to see he had a rather serious expression on his face. I have only heard stories about it from my teacher in Gran Torino. Apparently a long time ago in the States, a man could take quirks, which resulted in a hunger for more. How he got these quirks wasn't pretty, I heard. He was considered to be the first quirk serial killer in history. Tsukauchi looked shocked and a bit shaken by this. What was this guy's name? Tsukauchi asked, still reeling from what he heard. All Might just stood there for a while, before he resumed walking. His name was Siller. Meanwhile, at the Midoriya apartment, in a large apartment complex, in a small apartment, a short and plump woman with short green hair that was tied into a ponytail on her fell side looked very worried and jumpy. She was currently on the phone talking to her best friend, Mitsuki Bakugo, mother to Kasuki Bakugo, her son Izuku's former friend. The reason why she was talking to her that she was growing more worried that Izuku hadn't come home yet. Something he's been doing a lot as of late. She was hoping that he'd stop by at Mitsuki's. Unfortunately, he hadn't. Not in a long time. Thank you, Mitsuki. I'm sorry to bother you. No, I'm alright. If you do see Izuku, please tell him to call me. Alright, bye. Inko Midoriya sighed as she hung up the phone. Her worries for her son and where he was were only growing. Inko soon found herself walking towards the living room, where she took a seat on the couch. Where are you, Izuku? Why have you been acting so strange? Inko wasn't a fool. For the last few months she knew something was going on with her son. She was a mother after all. She knew Izuku was sneaking out at night, or not coming home from school after a long time for a reason. She just didn't know why. At first she thought it was because he's just a teenager. But that changed when he started coming home in bad shape. Usually he'd come home with cuts, scrapes, bruises and even burns at one point. Inko thought it was because he was getting bullied. But that wasn't it. Her son was changing. He's been reading tons of books, magazines and manuals. Some stuff that were too advanced for him. But he would finish those kind of books in a few hours. He'd also spend hours in his room, isolating himself, which only got her more worried. He's also been writing crazy stuff on a handmade manual he's made, detailing quirks, their strengths and weaknesses. She's even seen her quirk on there. All this craziness began a few months ago, when Izuku came rushing home and locked himself in his room. Like he did something terrible. Inko tried to talk to him but he wouldn't come out. Not for hours. Until he did. When he came out, Izuku acted differently. More cautious and curious. Eventually things went back to normal. For a while. That is until Inko noticed that Izuku was acting strange again. Inko noticed that Izuku would watch her or loom over her strangely. Like he was studying her or waiting for her to mess up or something. She began to fear him a little when she found him looming over her when she was sleeping. Eventually all that stopped. Right around that villain known as the Stalker showed up. Another reason she didn't want Izuku to be late at night. Inko heard the rumors and news reports about the Stalker. A mysterious villain vigilante that would stalk people at night. Usually bad people. But Inko didn't want her or Izuku to ever encounter them. She also heard that he or she would leave their victims brain dead. A shell of their former selves. Inko didn't want that happening to her poor Izuku. I should probably watch some TV until he comes home. Inko stated with another sigh as she turned on the TV. She looked to see that it was a breaking news report. I wonder what's happening. Breaking news, an hour ago in the middle of a crowded street. An unexpected villain attack took place. That involved Mount Lady, Kamui Woods and another mysterious pro-hero. The villain that attacked was revealed to be the Stalker. A mysterious villain that many consider a vigilante who recently showed up these last few months, attacking and leaving his victims in a vegetative state, many of whom were pretty criminals. Inko sat up straight as she listened to the report carefully. She began to have a very sinking and dark feeling down in her stomach. She hoped her son was alright. The fight was rough and resulted in Kamui Woods and the other pro-hero being hospitalized, leaving only Mount Lady to face the Stalker alone. During the altercation, Mount Lady unknowingly put innocent lives in danger. Thankfully no one was seriously hurt or lost their lives, thanks to the Stalker, who stopped a collapsing building from falling on many innocents. However, he unknowingly placed his life in danger, but before anything happened, Japan's #1 hero All Might saved the day and apprehended the Stalker, resulting in his arrest. Inko gave out a small sigh of relief. She was glad no got hurt too badly, or worse got killed. She was also glad that no good Stalker was behind bars now. That's one worry off her chest. Unfortunately her son wasn't back yet. Before Inko knew it, the news report continued, so she brought her attention back on the TV. Reports are sketchy, but the Stalker was shown to have been using multiple quirks. Many reliable witnesses can confirm this. Unfortunately we are unable to confirm this for ourselves. On the other hand, after being apprehended we were able to confirm his identity. With cooperation from the police and pro-heroes, Inko just sat there waiting for them to continue, not knowing she was going to have the shock of her life. Before she knew it, they showed the Stalker in a mugshot, cuffed and chained, while having a guilt and shamed-looking expression. Inko sat there, her face and eyes were whitened, in shock and disbelief. She couldn't believe it. Izuku. A little while ago at the Bakugo household, for the last time, I don't know where that shitty Deku is. Kasuki Bakugo yelled out with a vein appearing on his forehead. Kasuki was an average height for his age. He had ash blonde hair and had red eyes. He was currently outside the backyard of his home training, but couldn't because of his mom. Apparently because Deku's mom was calling, asking if they'd seen him. Fine, you shitty brat. And stop yelling. Kasuki heard his mom yelled out in the house. Kasuki just growled out as he fired off a small explosion from his palms. Boom. His quirk was called Explosion. It's an emitter quirk. It was a deadly and powerful quirk that matched a bit like his personality. Kasuki growled again as he kept on using his quirk. The sweat he was working was helping him out a lot. This how he burned off steam. And as of late he's been so pissed off. The reason. Deku. Kasuki snarled out with a pissed off expression. As of late Izuku, who called Deku, because he was a quirkless and shitty nerd, had been getting on his nerves lately. It happened a few months ago. On a day he would remind Deku how worthless he was along with his friends. They would usually beat him up and they did. But this time was different. It was almost he was enjoying it. Seeing their quirks in action. It creeped him out that they stopped bullying him. Lately that's all he's been doing. Sneaking around trying to see how people's quirks worked. Writing everything in that little manual of his. I'm gonna destroy that little fucking manual next time I see it. Kasuki yelled out as he kept firing explosions. That'll show the quirkless shithead. Well, Kasuki and Izuku used to be best friends when they were kids. That changed when he got his quirk, and Deku didn't. It showed him that he was powerful. And that Deku and everyone else were just pebbles in his way. Deku was a pebble. An annoying pebble. That's all he was. With one last furious yell, Kasuki was done. After recovering his breath, he decided to head inside and hit the sack. That shit had better be home with his mom. Good for nothing dumbies shouldn't worry her like that. Well, he didn't care about Izuku. Kasuki cared for his mom just like his own. She was kind and always smiling. Deku didn't deserve such a woman as a mother. Kasuki was just about to open the back door. His mom called out for him. Kasuki, get in here now. Kasuki groaned out in anger as he came marching inside. Eventually he made to the living room where his mom and dad were. Their faces in shock as they looked at the TV. Before Kasuki could say anything his gaze was on the TV. And what he saw he couldn't believe. Reports are sketchy. But the Stalker was shown to have been using multiple quirks. Many reliable witnesses can confirm this. Unfortunately we are unable to confirm this for ourselves. On the other hand, after being apprehended we were able to confirm his identity. With cooperation from the police and pro-heroes. The TV showed the mugshot of Izuku in his stalker gear, all chained and cuffed, while having a dejected and guilty expression. His name is Izuku Midoriya. He is 14 years old and is a junior high school student at Oradera Junior High School. He's reported to have been quirkless, but that appears to not be the case. Since many witnesses and pro-heroes can confirm he has multiple quirks, we are unable to reach Mr. Midoriya for comment. However, we are working on getting one from his family and authorities who apprehended him. Stay tuned for more information. No one in the room could believe it. Kasuki more than anyone. His mom was the first one to snap out of it. She quickly headed to the phone and began to try and call Inko. Katsuki's dad just there on the couch. Still shock. The same for Katsuki, who still couldn't believe it. Izuku Midoriya, Deku, was the infamous and feared stalker. The Bujiman to thugs and lowlifes everywhere. No fucking way. Meanwhile elsewhere, word was already spreading about stalker, aka Izuku Midoriya. How he attacked pro-heroes and had them at his mercy. How he revealed his identity to the world to save a group of people from death. All because of a pro-hero's fault. How he has risked his own life. Many who knew Izuku could believe it, some refused to believe it. Word of the stalker being a child reached many lowlifes and thugs everywhere. Some of whom had lost friends or rivals because of him. Now that he was in police custody, they had nothing to fear anymore. Some were even thinking about getting payback. Maybe by attacking that school of his or paying his family a visit. While that was happening, a mysterious large man sitting in a large medical chair, while being hooked to a number of machines and other things, couldn't help but chuckle at the news he was hearing on the TV. Something wrong, master? A well-mannered and serious voice asked in the shadows. Does something about this bother you? The man just chuckled again. No, Kurajiri, it amuses me that someone could have a quirk so similar to Siller's would be around. And to be someone so ordinary too. And in my backyard of all places. Do you want me to retrieve him? Kurajiri asked, still lurking in the shadows. The man sighed as he was in deep in thought. No, let's see what happens to this dear boy. Right now he's little more than an animal. If he does prove himself, maybe we'll recruit him into our ranks. But for now we shall wait. Yes, master, I understand. Kurajiri said before a loud whooshing was heard. And Kurajiri was gone, leaving the man to his thoughts. I wonder, child, how will you end up? Will you be like Siller and follow his path just as he began? Or will you follow the path he chose after that incident? Will you become an ally or a rival just like him? The man leaned forward on his chair a bit, revealing his face. The man's face seemed to be made entirely of scar tissue, extending from above his upper lip and covering his entire head and the back of his neck. As such, he had no visible nose, ears, hair, or eyes, though outlines of eye sockets could be seen. Whatever happens, I'll watch you closely. Izuku Midoriya. I wonder, child, how will you end up? Will you be like Siller and follow his path just as he began? Or will you follow the path he chose after that incident? Will you become an ally or a rival just like him? The man leaned forward on his chair a bit, revealing his face. The man's face seemed to be made entirely of scar tissue, extending from above his upper lip and covering his entire head and the back of his neck. As such, he had no visible nose, ears, hair, or eyes, though outlines of eye sockets could be seen. Whatever happens, I'll be watching you closely. Izuku Midoriya. With Izuku, the last hour had been quiet for Izuku. The guard and cameras were still watching him, but everything seemed alright. They still got chained up like some kind of animal. Sitting on this metal chair was getting uncomfortable, but he powered through. Everything seemed fine, but that quickly changed. The hunger, it came back. Izuku began to sweat and shake. He hated this. He wished he was quirkiness because this feels like a curse if anything. Maybe if he had his manual and could write on it, it would calm him down. Sadly, he left that back at home. I'm in control. I'm in control. I'm in control. Izuku murmured as he repeated himself over and over, greatly unsettling the guard. I'm in control, damn it. The guard have enough and tapped their baton aggressively on his cell bars. Keep it down. The guard ordered with a sneer. Freak. Immediately after that, Izuku froze. Like he completely shut down. A minute later, Izuku looked up and smiled darkly at the guard. No problem, officer. Izuku softly said in a slightly creepy tone and smile. The guard flinched. This kid was really freaking him out. He wished that next guy on shift would come already. He's heard the rumors about this kid, and he doesn't want to end up like his victims. The guard eventually eased up a bit and leaned up against a wall. This was going to be a hell of a shift. While that was happening, the guard failed to notice that Izuku was doing something strange. He lowered his head to hide that his eyes had changed. They changed into the eyes of a rodent, a rat or mouses. Meanwhile, outside in a dark alley, 3 rats were eating garbage and scurrying about, that is until they suddenly stopped. Their eyes slightly changed color into a dark red. Then, like they were ordered, all 3 rats began to scurry along the police station. Eventually they found what they were looking for. A broken and open vent. The rodents scurried in and were off to do what they were told, to find a safe exit and help release their master. His hunger had returned. With All Might and others, Japan's one hero All Might was currently still in his sickly form. He was in a large office, which belonged to his friend Tsukauchi. He was sitting in a chair, deep in thought. He wasn't alone in the office. Tsukauchi and few others were present with him. They were watching a small TV that was showing the news. And all they were talking about was the incident. This is rather troubling, Nezu stated with a sigh. Nezu was a pro-hero and principal at UA High School. He looked to be a small anthropomorphic dog bear mouse thing in an elegant suit. It looks like someone has leaked the information we have on Izuku Midoriya, which will cause some difficulties for us, I'm afraid, and for young Izuku's family. The people present couldn't help but agree. The people in the office, other than Tsukauchi, were all pro-heroes. Eraserhead, Shota Izawa, who had a couple of bandages on, courtesy from his fight with Izuku. His coworkers tried to convince him to stay in the hospital or take the night off. But of course he didn't listen or care. He wanted to stay close by in case something happened to Izuku. For some reason he was interested in our young stalker. For whatever reason. Murikeyama aka Midnight, the 18+ only hero. Hisashi Yamada aka Present Mick. Sekijiro Kansas aka Vlad King, Blood Hero. Kenishiyama aka Cementus and the Space Hero 13 were all there too. They were all gathered to discuss what they were going to do with Izuku and deal with the aftermath of the incident. We may need to place Inko Midoriya under police protection. Maybe even pro-hero protection too. Cementus stated in a serious yet well-spoken tone. Because of her son's sudden reveal as the stalker, many might want to attack or kill her for her son's actions. Most of his victims had family and allies who seemed to want such retaliation. We should bring her here just in case. Few of the heroes nodded, expect one. So, you just want to force this poor woman into more grief? Midnight asked in a harsh and serious manner. Her son is in jail and charged for being a vigilante in multiple charges. And you want to bring her in just in case the poor woman is probably losing her mind because she was told on the news of all places that her son is in jail for being a vigilante and having a whole list of victims under his belt. Cementus countered in a well-mannered tone. That still made Midnight growl in response. Her son is a menace that attacked and injured pro-heroes on duty. And for that he's in jail because of it. And because of him her life may be in danger. She's just going to have to accept that. Everyone in the room could tell this was going to get ugly. Midnight glared at the cementing hero with anger. You son of a. Thankfully before things could escalate. 13 got in between the two, along with Vlad King. Look, we're not here to fight with one another. We're here to discuss our next move. 13 calmly stated, trying to defuse the situation. Well, I agree with what you're saying, Midnight. Cementus is right. Inko Midoriya might need protection just in case. Alright. Midnight and Cementus glared at each other for the longest time. Until Midnight sighed and nodded. Good, so we'll contact Mrs. Midoriya to come down to the station. Just in case. After all, she might want to check on her son. 13 stated, getting more nods from his colleagues. Speaking of which, how is he? Sakauchi sighed as he grabbed the remote to the TV and changed the channel. Which showed Izuku, chained up with his head lowered. Unmoving. He's been like that for the last hour. He hasn't said much. The chief isn't back from Tokyo yet. So we haven't really got to question him. Chief wanted to take this one personally. Sakauchi explained to the heroes. Even though that was a lie. Since he and All Might questioned him a little over an hour ago. But they didn't need to know that. We thought about moving him to a more secluded and powerful cell. Since we don't know the full extent of his quirks. We also have other prisoners too. If he does manage to break out. What's stopping him from taking their quirks? He's a complete wild card. Most of the heroes still couldn't believe it. How could a boy with such a mundane background and ordinary face be so powerful? And one of the most infamous vigilantes in Japan. Who hasn't even been that active that long. Still hard to believe this punk could have so much power. I still can't believe he beat you, Aizawa. Sure, you had those two rookies with you, but how could you let that kid get the better of you? Vlad King asked as he pointed at the TV. Aizawa didn't say a word, he just scoffed and looked away. Which made Vlad King grin. I'm sure I could have handled it. I doubt it. Everyone looked in surprise to see All Might with a serious face. I fought someone like that, with multiple quirks. Aizawa and those rookies are lucky to be alive. There's no telling what he would have done if he was like the one I fought. All Might explained in a dead serious tone. That made Vlad King's grin disappear. Everyone remained quiet as they listened to All Might, who looked at the TV. Why did he reveal his identity and risk his life to save people? The man I fought, he would have let those people die in an instant. Why didn't he do it? Everyone was stunned and remained silent. Asking the same question as well. Why? Does it matter? He's a vigilante, he's left countless victims in his path. All of whom are brain dead. Even though they weren't model citizens. Izuku Midoriya is a criminal. Simple as that. Vlad King coldly stated, only getting a few nods. He's also an unregistered quirk user. Even if he doesn't mean it. He can't control his quirk or quirks. He is a danger to himself and those around him. He also attacked 3 pro-heroes and endangered those people he saved. It doesn't matter what good he's done, he's dangerous and needs to be locked away. While most wouldn't put that way. Vlad King was right. Izuku Midoriya wasn't like most kids. He was different. He was dangerous. You're wrong, my dear friend. Everyone looked to see Nezu smiling as he watched TV. If we started locking people away because they can't control their quirks or understand them, then we would be no better than the evil we fight against every day. Nezu stated, still smiling. He then turned to All Might. You see it too, don't you, my friend? Well, he has made mistakes. I believe Izuku Midoriya has untapped potential. All he needs is a guiding hand, or hands. That's when he looked over to all his colleagues, who suddenly realized what he was insinuating. Oh, come on. You can't be serious. That's a crazy idea, even for you, Nezu. All Might just sat there stunned. Did Nezu see something in Midoriya that he also saw? It's true that he did feel sympathetic towards Izuku. But what he did was wrong. Well, he didn't have a choice. What he did to feed his hunger and gain those quirks was wrong. At least he had yet to take in a life. In a strange way, All Might felt something towards young Midoriya. Like he saw a bit of himself in the troubled boy. Could it be that he was the one he was searching for? A successor. The way he saw him risk everything to save those people, that woman and her child. Even if meant he would die. He didn't even hesitate. It frightened All Might to see so much of All for One in Izuku. Not just by Quirk or quirks alone. But the way he acted when he fought Aizawa, Kamui Woods and Mount Lady. That hunger and anger in his eyes. It was like seeing a younger All for One. Still though, when Izuku rushed in to save those people. It was like seeing a ghost. Especially when he saw him smile afterwards, when he was so close to getting crushed. It reminded him of what his sensei once told him. When you have to save someone, they're usually in a scary situation. A true hero saves not only their lives, but also their spirits. That's what I believe. So no matter how scary things get, give him a smile, as if to say, I'm okay. The people in this world who can smile are always the strongest. All Might remembered Izuku's smile, and compared it to his sensei's smile. It was like looking at a ghost. If there was a chance for him a long time ago, a child with no quirk to become a hero, then maybe there was a chance for Izuku. Even though he's caused pain and trouble as the stalker. Everyone deserves a second chance. Maybe Izuku deserved one too. All Might sat there for the longest time. Deep in thought. Finally it looked like he was about to speak, but before he could, something unexpected happened. The lights and TV suddenly went out. Boom. Everyone looked around to see everything was off, even the lights outside the office. Many people outside gasped or asked what was going on. Suddenly a dim light came on everywhere, which was the emergency power. That only powered the lights and cells. What's going? Before midnight could finish that sentence. A loud and thunderous explosion was heard. That shook the building a little. Boom. Everyone almost lost their balance but quickly recovered. All Might looked over to Tsukauchi, who had a worried expression on his face. He then looked to the rest of the heroes, who all knew what happened and who's the cause. And why. Lock down the building. A little while ago with Izuku. For the guard watching over Izuku, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. After all, he was guarding the most wanted guy in Japan. He's heard some scary stuff about this kid. How he left people brain dead. Well, the kid didn't look it. He was dangerous. At least that's what the lieutenant told him. As the guard continued to worry or complain to himself, Izuku just sat there, his head lowered. So the guard and cameras wouldn't be able to see him using his quirk. One of the many ways. This quirk was called Pied Piper. With it, Izuku is able to control rodents. He got this awesome crazy info broker who found out his identity. And he couldn't have that. That crazy guy tried to blackmail him into killing one of his rivals. But Izuku decided to put an end to it then and there. So, that's how he got this quirk, which he was using now to break out of here. He needed to get out here and find a quick meal. Then he can head home to his mom and explain everything. After that, well, he hadn't thought that much ahead yet. First he needed to break out of here and find someone's quirk to take. He didn't know who. But he'll get there eventually. His eyes were still like a rat's. Because he was controlling and through one of his rat's perspective. He sent two out to find him a quick and safe exit out of this building. And he found it. But first he needed to cut the power. Which will make getting out of here a lot easy. After a good minute, Izuku smiled. He found it. The place that powered this whole building. All he needed to do is tell the rat to chew through what looks important and hope for the best. He could use his main quirk to figure what to do. But he could only understand stuff if he was looking at it with his own two eyes. It was nice to have a weakness with all the power he has. It made him feel human. Izuku then thought of a way out of here. Giving his rat one last command. Izuku turned his quirk off and began to use another. A recent quirk he got a few weeks ago. Well, not the most powerful or useful at times. Izuku had a plan. With a smile he began to gather sawdust into his hands. This quirk was called sawdust. With it he is able to generate sawdust. While on a smaller scale, he could generate more if there was woods or other stuff nearby. But this would have to do for now. As time went by, Izuku had summoned enough sawdust. Now it was time to put his plan in action. His hands were filled with sawdust. All he had to do was ignite it somehow and try not to get himself injured or worse. After some thinking, Izuku figured something out. Arghhhh. The guard instantly looked at Izuku and saw him trying to break out of his cuffs and chains. While using his stone mimicry. It was easy enough to break the cuffs off, but the chains were a bit more durable. Meanwhile, the guard began to panic. People in the other cells on the row stopped what they were doing to see what was going on. The hell going on? Someone trying to escape. Better run, pig. The guard completely ignored the others and focused on Izuku, who had just gotten done breaking out of his chains. Afterwards, Izuku began to walk towards the cell bars and to the guard, who quickly raised his gun at Izuku in fear, who just smiled. Been a while since I've seen one of those pointed at me. Should tell you it didn't work so well for the last guy. Izuku stated as he continued to walk towards the bars. Please just let me out and no one gets hurt. At least I hope. Get on the ground now. The guard yelled out with his gun still raised. I'm giving you 3 seconds. Down now. Izuku just sighed as he shook his head. This was going to be difficult. 3. Are you for real? Just open. 2. Seriously, you have a gun. I'm currently made out of stone. How do you think this is going to turn? 1. Izuku groaned in annoyance. Suddenly all the lights and everything else turned off. Boom. The guard instantly panicked. He looked around in fear. Suddenly a dim lit red light came on, lighting the entire cell hallway, which meant that emergency power was on, and that the cells were still locked and shut. However, before he could sigh in relief, Izuku was at the cell bars staring at the guard with a smile, which caused the guard to raise his gun and fire in fear. Something Izuku hoped for. Before the guard could fire, Izuku threw all the sawdust he made at the guard and cell bars. He immediately ducked and shielded himself. Boom. Izuku softly stated. Bang. The guard fired his weapon. Unfortunately for him, the sawdust had reached him. The smallest bit of flame from the gunfire immediately ignited the sawdust and caused an explosion. Boom. The resulting explosion caused the guard to be sent flying, making him the wall, the resulting force causing him to cry out in pain. The explosion heavily damaged the cell and made the building shake a bit. Eventually, as the dust and building settled, Izuku got up and looked at the cell bars. They looked weak and damaged enough to break through now. With mighty yell, he grabbed the bars and pulled with all his might. The bars quickly broke off along with most of the cell door. Izuku then roughly threw them on the ground. Izuku then walked out of the cell. He looked down at the ground, looking at the hurt guard. He sighed and frowned. You should have let me go, Izuku stated rather darkly. His hunger was in now full control. He didn't know who this guy's Quirk was, but he didn't care. He needed to feed. Now, forgive me. Izuku slowly started to reach down to grab the guard and take his Quirk, but he suddenly stopped. His other hand grabbed the other one and squeezed so hard that his stone skin began to crack up. I'm in control. Izuku tried his best to stop himself, but he couldn't. All seemed lost until he heard a voice and footsteps coming from behind him. Back away from that guard, kid. He's our ticket out of here. Izuku turned around and saw 3 men. One was a fairly tall man with dirty hair who was wearing steel refinery clothes. Most likely his work clothes. He looked rather serious and had his quirk activated, which was making his hands look to be covered in hot molten magma. The other man looked as small and looked like a thug Izuku would hunt for. His clothes were baggy, and he had long dark hair. His quirk was also active. His right arm looked to be covered in metal. His hand looked to be replaced by a long and sharp blade. The last guy looked like the last guy, a thug. Except he looked more serious and afraid when he saw Izuku. His eyes were a strange glowing green hue. Most likely his quirk. Look, I don't care who you are or what you did, but we're going to use that guard as a hostage so we can walk out of this dump, the molten magma guy stated, causing the metal arm guy to smirk while the eye guy just whimpered. You in, kid? Or you gonna get in the way? Izuku just stood there, like he was in deep thought. Then with a dark smile and hungry look, he clenched his hand, causing him to stop using his stone mimicry quirk. Suddenly a bit of black haze started to slowly seep out of his mouth. I think I have a better idea. Izuku quickly blew out all the haze he could. Soon the hallway was completely covered in black haze. Screams were then heard quickly after that. A little while later, outside the cell hallway, many policemen and women were waiting outside a large hallway. All of them in riot gear with shields and batons. All of them ready to storm the door they all waited next to. The door to the cells where they kept Izuku and 3 other perpetrators and offenders who broke the law. This was the only way in or out. They had them trapped. What's the situation? Tsukauchi asked as he came walking into the hallway with All Might, who was in his hero form. He was also with a few of the heroes. Eraserhead, Vlad King and 13. The rest of heroes were nearby, but were checking to see if anyone was hurt by that explosion, since they didn't know where or how big it was. Has anyone tired to break out? The police officer in riot gear, who looked to be a cat, shook his head. No sir, we heard a bit of screaming, but that's all. We would have stormed in right away, but we thought we should wait for you and the heroes. Sansa Tamikawa said, giving a small salute. Tsukauchi gave a nod, telling him to be at ease. The feline officer nodded. He then pointed to the metal door that led to the cell hallway. We also couldn't do a thing because of this strange black mist, sir. We are waiting for someone to bring some gas masks from the armory. Tsukauchi and the heroes looked at the heavy metal door. It had a small window, but all it showed on the other side was a black haze. The haze looked to be also seeping from under the door in cracks, but was seeping enough to be a danger. Tsukauchi sighed as he nodded. Looks like they were going to have to wait for those gas masks before they could do anything. But All Might suddenly came up with an idea. 13, think you can get rid of that mist? Everyone looked to the space hero, who nodded. Just leave it to me, everyone. 13 walked up to the door and bent down a little. He placed his finger under the door, which was big enough, then activated his quirk, Black Hole. He releases a small vortex from any one of his fingers to suck anything and turn it into dust. Soon he began to suck up all the haze. Eventually the hallway filled with the mist was completely cleared. making it safe to enter. There you all go. 13 stated in a rather happy tone. Sakauchi smiled and nodded, his expression quickly turned serious. They had a man in there with 4 dangerous criminals. Alright, riot squad, get ready to storm the hallway on my command. Heroes, stay close if something happens. Everyone around Sakauchi nodded and got ready. The riot squad awaited his command, while All Might and the heroes got ready if anything went wrong. Sakauchi pulled out his gun, just in case. Alright now. The riot squad immediately opened the door and rushed in. They were soon followed by Sakauchi and the heroes. And what they found was shocking and a bit horrifying. Oh my god. The whole hallway looked like a battlefield. Slashes, burning parts, melting parts and small craters everywhere. And that wasn't the half of it. The guard that was on shift was unconscious while leaning against a wall. He looked beat up, but not as worse as the other prisoners. All 3 of them were laid out in various places. One was laying next to the guard, while one was very injured in an empty cell. That belonged to Midoriya. The last one looked to be thrown against the wall so hard, he was stuck in place. Men, check on our man and those prisoners. Be careful, I don't see Midoriya among them. Sakauchi sternly ordered, getting nods from the officers. 2 went to check on the guard while the rest went to check on the prisoners. A minute went by and Sakauchi grew worried. Status. Sir, the guard has some injuries and burn marks, but not too serious. One of the officers said as he checked on the guard one more time. He's just unconscious. But we should probably get him checked out. Sakauchi nodded as began to look towards the rest of his men. Status. One of the officers checked in with the rest of his colleagues. Then he walked over to Sakauchi with a sorrow-filled expression. The prisoners are alive but have suffered major injuries. Unfortunately, they appear to be unresponsive and in a vegetative state. Just like the rest of the stalker's victims. Sakauchi, All Might and the rest of the heroes were shocked. Sakauchi was the first to recover and ask the most important question. Where is Midoriya? Before the officer could reply, another officer called out to them at the end of the hallway. Where the last cell was. Sir? Over here. Sakauchi and the heroes quickly made their way to the officer. And were stunned by what they saw. You got to be kidding me. Vlad King stated. All of them were staring at a large melted hole that led to the back alleyway of the building. Big enough for someone to escape through. How did he manage that? 13 asked. Sakauchi sighed as he frowned. The other prisoners, he has their quirks now. Everyone still couldn't believe it. Izuku Midoriya, the infamous stalker, had escaped and had even more quirks under his command now. All Might frowned sadly as he looked at the hole. His thoughts went to Izuku. Where have you gone, young Midoriya? A while later with Izuku. In a dark alley, Izuku Midoriya was limping along the alleyway's wall. He was holding his right side with his left hand and he was clenching his teeth in pain. He was hurt. That magma guy got him pretty good. Izuku didn't active his stone mimicry fast enough. So now he had a really nasty burn mark. He removed his hand and wished he hadn't. He could see and even smell burned flesh. While injuries and wounds were no stranger to him. Not since he became the stalker. This made him want to puke or cry out in pain. And that wasn't all he had either. He had a few cuts and major slash on his back. Thankfully he was able to become stone before that happened. So all that guy slashed was his coat. The rest of his injuries unfortunately were real. He needed to get to a hospital or find help. But he couldn't. For obvious reasons. Makes me wish I had a healing or regenerative quirk. Izuku moaned out with a forced smile. Almost there, just got to make it. After a good minute, Izuku finally made to the other side of the alleyway. He then found himself in a lone street. It took him a while to get here. From dodging cops and heroes. But he was almost there. Home. Izuku looked up to see his apartment complex a block away. He could use enhanced jumping to get there quicker. But he was too injured and didn't want to draw attention. With a sigh, Izuku began to walk home. He knew it was a bad idea since that would be the first place the police and heroes would check. But he needed to see his mom now that his mind was clear. To explain and apologize. For everything. As Izuku continued make his way home. Something shocking happened. Daku. Izuku froze in place. He dared not move or even breath for the longest time. With a deep sigh and sad frown he turned around to where the voice came from. There a couple of feet from him, stood his former best friend and now main bully standing there. His face and eyes filled with rage. Kakin. Home. Izuku looked up to see his apartment complex a block away. He could use enhanced jumping to get there quicker. But he was too injured and didn't want to draw attention. With a sigh, Izuku began to walk home. He knew it was a bad idea since that would be the first place the police and heroes would check. But he needed to see his mom now that his mind was clear. To explain and apologize. For everything. As Izuku continued make his way home. Something shocking happened. Daku. Izuku froze in place. He dared not move or even breath for the longest time. With a deep sigh and sad frown he turned around to where the voice came from. There a couple of feet from him, stood his former best friend and now main bully standing there. His face and eyes filled with rage. Kakin. Both former friends stood there, staring at each other. Kasuki glaring at the wounded Izuku with all his anger. While our young vigilante hero stood there with a somber expression. Izuku never thought this would happen. Not in a million years. Maybe in his nightmares, but not now. What are you doing here, Kakin? Izuku asked softly in a serious tone. This caused Katsuki to growl and clench his fists in anger. He wanted nothing more to walk over there and beat Deku until he was an inch from death. But he needed answers. What the fuck? How did a shitty nerd like you get a quirk? How did you get a shit ton of quirks? Katsuki yelled out, trying to contain his anger but failing. And why the hell are you a fucking vigilante? This is all bullshit. Whatever tricks you have to convince those dumbasses won't work on me, Deku. Izuku just stood there, still holding on to his injury. The burn he got from that fight. He could feel himself getting weaker. Eventually Izuku sighed as he looked up at Katsuki. I don't have to explain anything to you. Izuku stated coolly as he turned around to walk away. Shocking Katsuki. Go home, Kakin, before you get hurt. As Izuku walked away, heading towards home, Katsuki stood stunned, then that quickly turned into a seething rage. How could such worthless nerd like Deku dare say that to him? What gave him the right? His quirkless ass needed to be taught a lesson. From making his mom worry about him and tricking those shitheads for believing he actually had a quirk. The ash-blonde hothead's hand began to smoke and burn a little. Don't you dare turn your back on me, Deku. Katsuki yelled out as he had enough. And charged at Izuku with his right arm and hand raised. Eat shit and die. As the explosive quirk user got closer and closer, Izuku sighed. He wasn't in the mood for this. Izuku turned around and raised his free arm and hand. He readied himself as Katsuki got closer. And when he was a mere foot away, Izuku let him have it. He used his sound emission quirk. Soundwave Blitz. Izuku yelled out as he shot a shockwave of sound at Kakin. They didn't have time to dodge because he was stunned. Izuku did have a quirk. So, Katsuki was hit by the shockwave of sound. It was so big and powerful that windows began to break from the buildings behind Katsuki. He was powerless as he had to shut his ears and fall down to one knee. ARGHHH. Katsuki yelled out as Izuku kept on firing his sound emission. Izuku suddenly began to walk towards Katsuki, who remained helpless. Which pissed him off to no end. As Izuku walked towards Katsuki, the shockwave of sound only got stronger. When he did arrive, Izuku stopped using sound emission and quickly activated another quirk before Katsuki could recover and attack. Izuku's free arm quickly turned into metal. And before Katsuki knew it, he was backhanded by Izuku into a building's outer wall. Katsuki yelled out in pain as he fell to hard ground. While nothing broke, it still hurt like hell. Izuku gave a regretful and sympathetic look at Katsuki who began to get up. His pained expression filled with rage. Go home, Kakin, I don't want to hurt you. Izuku said, dropping his sympathetic look. People most definitely heard that. I don't have time to mess around with you. I need to see my mom before the police or pro-heroes come. This made Katsuki growl more. He clenched his teeth as he shook off the pain. So you do have a quirk. More than one, Katsuki roughly said with a deep scowl. Don't you dare look down upon me because of that, you shithead. I don't care how many quirks you have. Or even if you are the fucking stalker. You could be the Bujiman for all I care. I'll still kill your worthless ass. Izuku was beginning to grow impatient. He didn't need to hear this. It was always the same with Kakin. All the yelling and cursing. He was tired of it. I'm telling you one last time, go home, Bakugo. Izuku stated, dropping his former friend's childhood name, making him flinch a little. I may be hurt, but I'm not the same Deku. Go home. Katsuki's scowl remained as sparks began to ignite from his hands. He couldn't believe it, Deku of all people was threatening him. This was a joke. That attack and backhand he got was a fucking joke. Deku was nothing but a fucking joke. So? This what you've been doing, hunting lowlife assholes and fighting heroes? Making your mom worry for your worthless ass? Katsuki yelled out, letting all his rage out. He then pointed a finger at Izuku. All that talk of you wanting to be a hero. That was all bullshit. And you being quirkless, that's a bullshit lie you've been telling me. You've been making look like a fucking fool. Deku. The tension in the air was thick, it almost felt heavy to breath. Katsuki just stood there glaring at Izuku. Waiting for an answer or something. Izuku stood there, his head lowered, hiding his expression. He then looked up at Katsuki, smiling. Suddenly after that he started to laugh. Angering and confusing Katsuki. Ha 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 ha. Izuku laughed out like a maniac. He kept that up for a good minute before calming down and sighing. He then looked at Katsuki with a dark look. You really are a fool if you think that's true. Katsuki backed up a bit, stunned to see this kind of side to Deku. But more angry that he insulted him. Look at you, just because you have a flashy and powerful quirk. You automatically think you're God. Guess what, you're not. Izuku yelled out in a very uncharacteristic tone. There are more powerful people out there than the two of us. Who could move mountains, raise storms, destroy cities and kill hundreds in a blink of an eye. And all you can do is cause a tantrum and blow stuff up with your sweat. You sweat. Katsuki clenched his teeth and fists as he let all of Izuku's words process in his head. It pissed him off beyond all belief to be talked down to. And by Deku of all people. You know what, between the two of us, I think I'm stronger than you. That immediately made Katsuki's eyes widen in shock before seething back in a rage. More rage than he's ever felt before. What the hell did Deku just say? My main quirk always me to understand how anything work, especially people and their quirks. And for the last few months, I've figured what makes you tick Kakin. I know all your strengths and of course weaknesses. And don't forget I have more than one quirk under my command. Izuku summoned a green flame that engulfed his free hand. I have a total of 13 quirks that I've required 3 of which could easily kill you. If I wanted to. You're strong Kakin, but you are not stronger than me. Well, you've been doing a bit of training. You haven't reached your full limit. I on the other hand has been fighting and hunting thugs for months. I have experience and power on my side. And to be perfectly honest, I haven't even reached my full limit. While most would think Izuku was being arrogant, he wasn't. Months of fighting and hunting had helped him get stronger both physically and mentally. Hell, he could handle 3 pro heroes at once. But to be fair, he was at a 100% when that happened. Now, he could barely stand. Overusing his pacify quirk and fighting those prisoners wasn't easy. He had the wounds to prove it. He doubted he could take on Kakin and win. But he wouldn't know if he didn't try. Katsuki on the other hand was completely livid. Oh yeah? Katsuki asked awfully calm while still glaring at Izuku. How about we test that theory of yours, Izuku? Izuku shook his head, either in disappointment or anger. He then looked up to Katsuki with a dead serious expression. I don't think you want to find that out. Even though I'm injured and a bit tired, I can still take you down. Izuku explained, still getting glared by Katsuki, who was about to lose it. Go home, or else. Enough. Katsuki screamed out as little explosions and flames shot out from his hands. You think you're hot shit just because you got a few shitty quirks, just because you took down some no-named assholes and some pro heroes? Well, you're not. You're just a pebble in my path. A worthless fucking pebble. You hear me? Izuku sighed as he slowly began to smile in a cocky way. Throwing a tantrum as always. You don't deserve the quirk. It's like giving a spoiled child a flamethrower. Go home. I ain't repeating myself again. Izuku warned as he moved his other hand from his burn injury. I don't want to hurt you any more than I have to. Instead of yelling or threatening Izuku, Katsuki just smiled in a very dark way. He then got into a fighting stance. You called it hurting me, you hit like a whiny bitch. Guess you know all about that, Kakin. Ha! Looks like you do have a pair after all. Izuku then got into his fighting stance. This was it. A fated battle between former friends. A long time ago, they were the best of friends. But now, it looks like they were bitter enemies. You know this is going to end one way, right? Yeah? With you on the fucking ground. That made Izuku smile and chuckle a little. Promises, promises. And with that, Izuku lifted up both hands and fired his sound emission. But just before he fired, Katsuki anticipated this. With a mighty yell, the explosion user jumped and fired a powerful explosion from his right hand, helping him dodge Izuku's attack. Then with an animalistic grin he rushed at Izuku. Die. Katsuki yelled out as he got closer and closer to Izuku, but barely had enough time to stop his quirk to activate another one. Izuku quickly activated his Iron Mate quirk to make a crude but huge metal shield formed from his arm. When Katsuki made it, he attacked Izuku with a strong explosion. The explosion was so powerful that it sent Izuku flying in the air. Thankfully, before he hit the ground, he deactivated Iron Mate and activated his pyrokinesis to summon a huge burst of green flames from his hands, which launched him in air and sent him flying towards Katsuki, who looked very annoyed. Take this. Izuku yelled out as he stopped using pyrokinesis and activated his haze quirk, blowing out black haze from his mouth as he was flying straight at Kakin. Katsuki didn't know what that black mist was, but he knew he shouldn't breath it. With a deep breath he raised his hands and used his quirk again. He fired 2 explosions that sent some of the haze away and sent Izuku flying again with a painful grunt. Thankfully, before he hit the ground this time around, Izuku used his stone mimicry to soften his landing, which it did. With a loud crash, Izuku landed, making Katsuki smile. But that smile went away when he saw Izuku in his stone form. Gonna take a lot more than fireworks to take me out, Kakin. Izuku yelled out with a grunt. He was of course bluffing because using his stone mimicry right now was very taxing, especially with his wounds. Thought you said you were gonna put me on the ground. Katsuki growled in response as he was getting more and more pissed off. Not wanting to give Katsuki time to attack again, Izuku rushed with all his might at Katsuki, who looked ready. Well, not the fastest in this form. Izuku was sure tougher and stronger. He just hoped this form could handle a head-on explosion to the face. Just as Izuku was a few feet away, Katsuki raised his right hand, getting ready for a right hook. Something Izuku saw coming. Predictable. Izuku yelled out as he quickly grabbed Katsuki's right arm. And with a yell he performed a powerful judo throw, sending Katsuki over him and throwing him hard on the ground. Right hook as always. All Katsuki could do was yell out in pain as he hit the asphalt of the deserted street. Izuku wasn't done there, however. The stone-skinned vigilante grabbed Katsuki by the hair and threw him across the street, making him hit the ground hard again. Go home, Kakin. Izuku yelled out, punching his fists together. I could have punched a hole right through you when you were down. Katsuki slowly began to get up. His expression was that of anger and pain, but he was focusing more on anger now. not wanting to give up or listen to Deku. The hot head of a blonde charged at Izuku again with his arm raised, making Izuku sigh again. Izuku got on the defensive expecting Katsuki to go straight at him. But he did something completely unexpected. He smiled and used his quirk directly under him, launching himself in air. And before Izuku knew it, Katsuki was in air over him. Die! Katsuki yelled out as he fired off 2 explosions while on the air that sent Izuku to the ground. The heat and flames he could handle, it was the force that he was having trouble with. Katsuki landed safely and afterwards rushed at Izuku again. This time using an explosion that's sending him skidding across the asphalt. Katsuki was smiling as he looked at Izuku, still in his stone form, trying to get up. Where's all that shit talking now, Deku? Katsuki asked very prideful and aggressively. Look at you. Even with all your shitty quirks, you're still getting your ass kicked. Well, Izuku didn't want to admit it. Kaken was right. He looked all over his body to see cracks, which meant any more punishment he got would be risking something to break off. Normally this wouldn't be the case, but he's injured and have been overusing his quirks. He was fighting on borrowed time. But Kaken didn't know that. Izuku finally got up and stood there deep in thought. Our young hero was running out of options. He could end this fight here and now, but all of his counterattacks involved deadly force. While he admitted Kaken was an ass, he still saw him as a friend. Or at least did. Eventually Izuku realized something. He did have another quirk that could counter Kaken's, though it was very risky, since he's really never had to use this quirk before. However, it looked like he had no choice. Izuku sighed as he deactivated his stone mimicry quirk. He looked at Kaken, who glared right back at him. The green-haired vigilante looked down at his wounds, specifically his burn mark. Looks like this is it. Izuku thought bitterly with a frown. He then smiled as he began to take off his burned and ripped up coat. Then his ruined shirt, confusing Katsuki. Darn, I really like that coat too. Katsuki eyes widened in shock by what he saw. All over Izuku's body were cuts, bruises and a massive burn mark on his side. That wasn't all. Katsuki saw old scars and other past injuries all over his body. And that was only on the front. Izuku noticed Katsuki's look and decided to explain. Not pretty, Kaken. A few of these I got from you and your friends, though those I could handle. The rest are from the lowlifes and others I've fought and hunted over the months. Most are from their quirks, a few though are from other things. Knives, bats, shivs, pipes and even a gun once. This burn mark and cuts I got all are from the police station I escaped from. While your explosions hurt, they tickle compared to what I've been through. Katsuki's shock quickly turned to anger. Even when he had him on the ropes, Deku was still acting like tough shit. I'm tired of this. I'm going to fucking kill you. Katsuki screamed out in anger. You hear me, Deku? I don't give a shit about your sob story. I'm going to end this. And prove you're nothing but a worthless piece of shit. Most would be unnerved or even mad about Katsuki raving around. But Izuku smiled and laughed, only making Katsuki angrier. Come on then, Kaken. I might actually feel something this time. And that was it. Katsuki yelled out in anger and charged at Izuku one last time, not bothering to come up with a strategy. Katsuki only wanted one thing. Izuku on the ground. Just as Katsuki was about to unleash his most powerful explosion he mustered, Izuku smirked as he quickly got down and placed his hands on the ground. Then just as Katsuki attacked, Izuku activated his quirk. Die. Boom. The resulting explosion caused the street and any if not all nearby buildings to shake. The windows nearly that weren't already broken, broke from the shockwave of the explosion. The flames and smoke could be seen from a mile or two. Heroes and police in the area looked up in shock. Then all quickly mobilized and headed to the scene as fast as they could. For one woman, in a small apartment, who's been crying and trying to contact the police. She was shocked and scared to see such a large explosion so close to her home. As she looked out, she knew those explosions from anywhere. And deep down she felt something. Or better yet, someone. Izuku, meanwhile back at the battle. Katsuki was panting. That attack was the most powerful and taxing one he's ever made. So powerful that his muscles and fingers were tensing up bad. Soon he smirked. There was no way Deku could have survived that attack. Unfortunately, as the dust and smoke began to settle, Katsuki was stunned by what he saw. Izuku was alive and was completely untouched by the attack. His hands and whole body looked red hot. Katsuki also swore he heard sizzling of some kind too. Almost like a stove. The ground below him looked to be completely decimated. All the asphalt was gone, only the dirt that laid before was all that was left. Izuku was breathing heavily and had a strained expression. He then smiled as he got up slowly. As his hands left the ground, his body began to slowly cool down. You know, that might have actually killed me, Izuku calmly stated in a fake shocked tone. His body looked to be cooling off, the sizzling red was all gone. He looked at Katsuki, who still couldn't believe what he was seeing. Lucky I'm not a one-trick pony, Kaken. Also, it's my turn. Before Katsuki could react, Izuku's right hand turned into metal. Then with all the strength his weakened body could muster, Izuku performed a mighty uppercut, sending Katsuki flying and seemingly knocking him out. Katsuki hit the ground hard, and this time he wasn't getting up. The surprise attack mixed with Izuku giving it his all and that punched seemed to have helped a lot. Izuku couldn't believe it. He beat his former best friend and main bully. While anyone would be celebrating, Izuku wasn't. Because how he won wasn't noble at all. He used trickery and multiple quirks that weren't really his to beat Kakin. That surprising punch didn't help either, especially since he used his Iron Mate quirk with it. Izuku looked ready to fall over. But some way and somehow he was still standing. His expression was that of regret as he looked over at Kakin's unconscious body. He then sighed. Well, they weren't friends anymore. It still hurt him on the inside to fight his former best friend. Forgive me, Kakin, but I doubt you ever will. I didn't mean for this to happen. But you left me no choice. Izuku began to slowly walk towards his home, eventually passing Katsuki's knocked-out body. When passing, he gave him a sympathetic glance before resuming his walk. If this is the last time we meet, I'm glad we talked. At least for a little while. Goodbye, Kakin. As Izuku kept on walking, he suddenly stopped. The reason? He wasn't alone. Before Izuku could activate any of his quirks, a dozen fiber-like threads quickly wrapped themselves around him, very tightly and immobilizing him. Izuku didn't bother to struggle because he knew it would be pointless. He knew who was doing this. Never thought you'd be in this city of all places. Are you passing through, or did they bring out all the big guns for me? Izuku asked very calmly before turning his head around to see that he captured him. Tsunagu Hakamata Aka Blue Genist, number 4 pro hero in Japan. Quirk, Fiber Master. Never thought I'd see you around here. What can I say? When I heard the infamous stalker had escaped as I was passing through, I couldn't help but see what all the fuss was about. Blue Genist coolly said in a well-spoken yet serious tone. His shirt sleeves seemed to be all cut up, but were in fact turned into threads that were restraining Izuku. To be frank, I'm underwhelmed. I was expecting someone older. This caused Izuku to sigh with a depressed face. I get that a lot. Izuku stated with a deflated tone. That's when he noticed they weren't alone. Wow, can't believe they sent this many people after me. Izuku looked around to see many pro heroes converging on him in Blue Genist. He saw the likes of Death Arms, Native, Backdraft, Midnight and a bandaged up and tired Eraserhead. All of the major heroes. Even if he was a 100%, Izuku knew he couldn't beat them all. Let alone escape from them. You know, if this wasn't such a serious situation, I'd probably be geeking out and asking for all your autographs. Izuku somewhat jokingly said, giving a weak smile. That smile turned into a frown. Unfortunately, looks like that isn't going to happen. Before anyone knew it, Izuku activated his Iron Mate quirk and summoned a multitude of metal sharp spikes from all over his upper body, which cut and weakened the threads restraining him. With a yell, he broke out for his restraints. He then got into a fighting stance, but not before turning both of his arms into metal. All the heroes save for Blue Genist and Aizawa got on the defensive, ready for Izuku to attack, but stopped when they saw the condition he was in. He had cuts, bruises, minor burn marks and a real major one. Some couldn't help but cringe or feel sympathetic when they saw all his past injuries. This kid looked like a battle-worn veteran. I'm not going anywhere until I see my mom. Izuku yelled out, ready to fight his way out of here. Even though that was impossible. He still wasn't ready to go down, even though his body was failing on him. I'll take you all on. Blue Genist and Aizawa knew they didn't need to fight or restrain Izuku. His body was already failing on him. It was only a matter of time before he would topple over. And the other heroes were beginning to realize that too. Come on, kid, give up and come with us. Death Arms said calmly to Izuku. You're seriously hurt. Let us help you. Fuck off. Izuku yelled out aggressively as he stopped using his Iron Mate quirk and immediately activated his Molten Hands quirk. That got everyone on the defensive again. I'm not going anywhere. Suddenly a loud whoosh was heard from behind of Izuku. Whoosh. I think you're done, young Midoriya. Izuku quickly turned around and came face to face with the towering All Might, who was looking down at Izuku very sympathetically. Please, my boy, stop fighting. And rest. All Might told Izuku in a calm yet serious tone. He then placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, making him flinch and putting all the other heroes on edge in case Izuku was going to attack All Might. But he didn't. I promise you'll see your mother. After you get medical attention. You have my word. Izuku didn't know why, but he couldn't help but believe him. He didn't want to, but something deep down was telling him otherwise. Before Izuku knew it, his quirk deactivated and felt very tired. Last thing before his body failed on him was All Might's reassuring face. Izuku lost consciousness and fell into the arms of All Might, who couldn't help but feel sorry for the young vigilante. Best now, young Midoriya. All Might thought as he picked up Izuku bridal style. He then looked to Aizawa. I'm taking him to Recovery Girl. Tell Tsukauchi I'll meet him there. Take care of the other child, please. Aizawa didn't make a fuss and nodded. With that, All Might leaped high in the air and began to head to UA High School, leaving the rest of the heroes in the lone street. Backdraft and Midnight went to check on Katsuki, who was still knocked out. Meanwhile, Aizawa looked where All Might took off with Izuku, and couldn't help but sigh. I need a break. Fuck off. Izuku yelled out aggressively as he stopped using his Iron Mate quirk and immediately activated his Molten Hands quirk. That got everyone on the defensive again. I'm not going anywhere. Suddenly a loud whoosh was heard from behind of Izuku. Whoosh. I think you're done, young Midoriya. Izuku quickly turned around and came face to face with the towering All Might, who was looking down at Izuku very sympathetically. Please my boy, stop fighting. And rest. All Might told Izuku in a calm yet serious tone. He then placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, making him flinch and putting all the other heroes on edge in case Izuku was going to attack All Might. But he didn't. I promise you'll see your mother. After you get medical attention. You have my word. Izuku didn't know why, but he couldn't help but believe him. He didn't want to, but something deep down was telling him otherwise. Before Izuku knew it, his quirk deactivated and felt very tired. Last thing before his body failed on him was All Might's reassuring face. Izuku lost consciousness and fell into the arms of All Might, who couldn't help but feel sorry for the young vigilante. Rest now, young Midoriya. All Might thought as he picked up Izuku bridal style. He then looked to Aizawa. I'm taking him to Recovery Girl. Tell Tsukauchi I'll meet him there. Take care of the other child, please. Aizawa didn't make a fuss and nodded. With that, All Might leaped high in the air and began to head to UA High School, leaving the rest of the heroes in the lone street. Backdraft and Midnight went to check on Katsuki, who was still knocked out. Meanwhile, Aizawa looked where All Might took off with Izuku, and couldn't help but sigh. I need a break. The next day, at UA High School. It was next day. The day after, a night no one will forget. The night Japan's most infamous and mysterious vigilante revealed themselves. No could believe it. The stalker was a middle schooler, a simple boy with a simple background. And yet he was able to hunt and strike fear into common thugs and other criminal scum. He took on 3 pro heroes at the same time, saved a large group of civilians from death while putting his own in danger. It took All Might, the symbol of peace and Japan's #1 hero, to save and apprehend him. Even when he was captured, Izuku Midoriya Aka the stalker managed to escape and take 3 dangerous criminals down. The same ones who were locked up with him. Unfortunately, he didn't escape without a scratch. His injuries from his encounter with Eraserhead, Kamui Woods and Mount Lady did a number on him. But the fight he had with those inmates really got him. Yet he still kept on moving. When he was close to his destination after escaping, Izuku was confronted by his childhood friend now turned bully, Katsuki Bakugo, which ended in a fight. A serious fight most pro heroes would never find themselves in. And still Izuku walked away. When All Might and the other pros found him, they couldn't believe he was still standing. Sadly, that last fight took everything out of him. In the end, Izuku fainted in All Might's arms. After which, All Might rushed Izuku to the best doctor nurse he knew. Recovery Girl. It took a lot, but Izuku was in stable condition and carefully cuffed to his bed. And under careful watch by All Might. The wielder of One for All stayed with Izuku all night, along with Izuku's mother, Inko Midoriya, who All Might personally brought so she could be with her son. Something he wasn't supposed to do. In fact, he was supposed to turn Izuku into the local hospital where the police would take over from there. But All Might managed to pull some strings so Izuku would be under his watch. Something that Inko was most grateful for. There was also the fact the hospital or any other didn't want Izuku under their care. For obvious reasons. Thank you again, Mr. All Might, for everything. Inko said in a low and grateful tone as she watched her son sleep from her chair, which was very close to Izuku's bed. She then looked to All Might, who wasn't in his hero form. I can't thank you enough. All Might, also known to be Toshinori Yagi, just smiled in response. Think nothing of it, Mrs. Midoriya. All Might stated with a kind smile. And please, call me Toshinori. After all, you do know my secret. Inko nodded with a smile. Last night was crazy and stressful for Inko Midoriya. First, her son was out past his curfew, like always. Then she found out on the TV that he was the stalker. A wanted and scary vigilante, by the way, who was arrested for his crimes as the stalker and for assaulting and endangering pro heroes and many others. Inko almost fainted when that happened. She just about lost her mind when she heard explosions and fighting near her home, which she knew involved Katsuki and someone else, who she suspected was her son. After that, she tried her best to contact someone who could tell her what was going on and where her son was. Unfortunately, she was met with lies or silence. She was about to lose hope when all of a sudden, All Might came knocking on her door and explained everything. She didn't need to know any more after that. All she cared about was seeing if her son was alright. All Might was about to carry Inko to Izuku, which would have been faster. Sadly, his time limit had been spent. So he went from his hero form to his true form right then and there in front of Inko, who took it just as well as you would expect. Sorry about fainting last night when you know. Inko sheepishly apologized, blushing. I'm easily startled. All Might laughed and gave a big smile that deepened Inko's blush. Again, think nothing of it. Still though, All Might began to softly say as he looked down at Izuku. I wish I could do more. That's when Inko blushed and embarrassing expression disappeared, and was replaced by a saddened one. She knew that Izuku was in trouble. Deep trouble. The crimes he's committed as the stalker were some of the worst crimes a person could commit. Inko thanked God that Izuku hadn't killed anyone or gotten killed. It broke her heart to see her son like this. Inko slowly got up and walked over to her son. Seeing him like this, cuffed up, covered in injuries, she knew that Izuku had some scrapes and a few scars, mostly from his younger years. But all of this were from the last few months. Inko looked down at his major injury from last night, the massive burn mark. She tried her best not cry. All Might looked over at Inko and couldn't help but feel sorry for her. "Mr. Toshinori, what's going to happen to my son?" Inko softly asked with a bit of hesitation, afraid of what kind of answer she was going to get. She turned to All Might with a serious yet somewhat misty-eyed face. "Please be honest with me." All Might couldn't bear to see anyone giving him that kind of look. It made him feel helpless. All his power, he couldn't do a thing to help Inko from the truth. He didn't want to tell her, he also couldn't lie to her. She deserved to know, even if it would cause her much pain. The symbol of peace sighed, then took a deep breath. He looked down at the small woman with a serious gaze. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Mrs. Midoriya. Izuku is looking to face some very serious consequences for what he's done." All Might spoke in a serious tone as he looked down at Inko, who flinched. "Izuku has done some serious crimes as the stalker. As of last night he's assaulted 19 people, 3 of whom are pro-heroes, and 1 being a police officer. 13 of his victims are now brain dead, with no hope of recovery. He escaped from lockup, placed multiple people in danger. He's also an unregistered quirk user, with a very dangerous quirk that's very similar to someone that could even give the most seasoned heroes nightmares." Inko suddenly froze in place, her face darkened as she looked down, trying to avoid All Might's gaze. "You know who I'm talking about, don't you?" All Might stated rather than asked, because they both know who he was talking about. "What is your son's connection to the man called Siller?" Inko stood there for a while, not bothering to face the mighty hero, who kept looking down at the woman sympathetically. Eventually Inko spoke in a low tone. "Please don't call him that. When I met him, his name was Hisashi Midoriya." Inko explained with a soft yet sad smile. "We met a long time, when I just got out of college, around 16 years ago. He wasn't using his real face and identity, mind you. Still, I fell in love with the man. He loved me too. Not because of my quirk or looks. He loved me for me." All Might didn't know what to say. From what Inko was talking about, it didn't sound anything like the serial killer Siller. But he knew better. He remained quiet as he let Inko continue to speak. "We dated for a while and eventually we had a baby on the way." Inko said with a soft smile as she looked over at Izuku, who was still asleep. "He asked me to marry him. It didn't take long for me to say yes. He was so giddy after that." Inko smiled as she laughed a little as she remembered that day. However, that smile soon disappeared. Everything seemed to be wonderful after that. But that changed when Hisashi finally told me who he was. Inko softly said in a downcast tone. "He told me who he was, what he did and why. He even showed me his true face." Inko closed her eyes as she remembered her husband. Even though he lied to her and kept his secrets, she still loved him. After all, he gave her Izuku, her baby boy. All Might remained silent as he tried to process all this. Siller, the serial killer who took quirks, was Izuku's father. He couldn't believe it. But truthfully, he kind of suspected it. Well, Izuku's quirk was eerily similar all for one. It turned out to be very similar to Siller's. It all made sense now. "Before you ask, I don't know where he is." All Might looked at Inko, who had a serious yet saddened expression. "When Izuku was born, Hisashi left, but not before telling me why." Inko began to explain as he walked over to her son's side. She couldn't help but feel regret as she saw his unconscious form. "He told me there was always going to be people who would hunt him. Not able to forgive what he's done. I know he's killer and what he did. But that didn't stop me from loving him, and from him being my child's father. He left to protect me and our son." Inko bent down and touched Izuku's cheek. She knew what he did and why. And she couldn't hate or fear him for it. It wasn't his fault. It was just his nature. With a sigh, Inko turned around to look at All Might. "I don't hate Hisashi, I couldn't bring myself to even if I wanted," Inko said as her voice began to crack up. Her expression softened as it looked like she was going to cry. "I just wish my son didn't have to suffer because of him. And because of me." Inko suddenly began crying now, making All Might feel very sympathetic towards the woman. He knew it wasn't her fault because of this. Not even Izuku's. Not being able to control and being fearful of one's quirks was normal. It was no one's fault. If anything, this was just plain bad luck. As Inko continued to cry, All Might decided he had enough. He walked over to the small crying woman, who stopped when she felt a hand gently touch her shoulder. She looked up to see All Might giving her a kind and sympathetic smile, slightly causing Inko to blush. "No one is to blame, Inko," All Might said, dropping formalities. "I don't know why, but something tells me your son isn't like his father. When I saw him save those people, I know he wouldn't do such terrible things unless he had no choice. Well, I have no idea how, I promise you. I will do everything in my power to help you and young Midoriya." Inko was speechless. She couldn't believe what was happening. The most powerful and popular hero in Japan was promising to help her and most importantly her son. The short mother began to weep once more. Suddenly she did something unexpected. She wrapped her arms around him, bringing him into a hug. All Might looked down at Inko in shock. But that changed when she spoke once more with a light sob. "Please save my son Toshinori." Inko pleaded, still misty-eyed. All Toshinori could do was nod. He couldn't say no even if he wanted. He didn't know how. But he was going to do everything he could to help Izuku. No matter what he did or who his father was. Suddenly an idea popped into his head. Or rather an earlier idea his colleague and fellow hero Nezu suggested. Letting Izuku, a now-known vigilante villain and unregistered quirk user, join UA High School. A well-known and prestigious hero school. Where only the best were accepted. People driving to be a hero. How would it work? Given his quirk and record. It would seem impossible. At least, that's what most would think. All Might had a plan. Meanwhile, at a local hospital, in a normal hospital room, Kasuki Bakugo was silently resting on his hospital bed, looking up at the ceiling. He had a few bruises and scratches here and there. He was also bandaged up. His face was expressionless as he kept his eyes locked on the ceiling. However, he wasn't like this a few hours ago. Apparently after the fight the heroes sent him to the nearest hospital, where he slept through most of the night. When he woke up he found him in hospital garb and on a hospital bed. His mom and dad by his side. Of course they were relieved to see he was awake and alright. But that changed when his mom hit him over the head hard. The reason? For running off in the middle of the night and confronting Izuku. Most parents would hate the person who placed their son in the hospital. However, Mitsuki and Masaru Bakugo weren't like that. They both knew Izuku. Since he was a little boy, when he and their son were best friends. Well, they didn't really know what was happening and why he was the stalker. They knew that he wouldn't have hurt Kasuki unless he had no choice. Mitsuki was of course mad. Mostly at her son's stubborn and hot-headed personality and ego. Both parents were outside Kasuki's room on in the hallway, talking and giving their son some space. "I still can't believe this happened," Masaru said in a low tone. He looked over at his wife to see her looking through a window outside the hallway that showed their son and his room. "Why did this happen?" Mitsuki sighed as she shook her head. "This happened because our son is an idiot. He was the one who ran off in the night looking for trouble. It's his fault, Masaru," Mitsuki explained as she turned to her husband, who looked surprised by his wife's response. "I love our son, honey. I do with all my heart. But you have to admit, he had this coming." Masaru hated to admit it, but Mitsuki was kind of right. Well, he loved his son. Masaru knew that ever since his quirk manifested, Kasuki changed. And not for the better. He had grown into an arrogant and aggressive teenager. While a long time ago his mother wasn't so different. Mitsuki on the other hand knew better. Unfortunately it seemed that Kasuki didn't. "I suppose you're right, Mitsuki, I just wish this didn't need to happen in the first place," Masaru stated with a frown. "Still can't believe Izuku did this. For heaven's sake, he seemed such a passive and calm young lad. What happened?" Mitsuki sighed once again. She wanted to know why as well. "I don't know, Masaru. I tried calling Inko earlier, but it just kept going straight to voicemail," Mitsuki said bitterly with a frown. She was annoyed of course. But she was more worried if anything. "God, I hope she's alright." Masaru noticed how his wife looked. With a small smile he walked over to her and wrapped his arm around her, surprising her. "I'm sure this isn't easy for her. But you and I both know Inko is a tough woman." Mitsuki smiled softly as she nodded. She then leaned over and gave her husband a small peck on the cheek, causing Masaru to smile. Eventually both parents were looking through the window at their son, who remained quiet and emotionless. "Do you think he'll be alright, dear?" Masaru asked worryingly as he kept his eyes on their son. Mitsuki remained silent. She really didn't know how to answer her husband. Their son really hasn't been himself since he woke up. He barely talked or even complained. Something he liked to do constantly. Now, it seemed that fight he had with Izuku affected him harder than they expected. "I don't know, Masaru," Mitsuki softly said as she placed her hand on the window. While this was happening, Kasuki remained in the same state we saw him in. Just laying there while looking up at the ceiling. He felt lost. No, he felt more annoyed and confused if anything. All of this was a lot to take in. More so for him than anybody else. The hot head of a blonde still couldn't believe it. He lost to Deku out of all fucking people. Not only that, but he also found out that the little shit stain had a quirk. And not just a quirk, but a bunch of them apparently. All these years he's been lying. Lying to everyone, his mom, their school and classmates. To him. A dark scowl quickly appeared on Kasuki. He then clenched his hands into a fist. "Deku, you shithead," Kasuki growled out. Losing to Deku really pissed him off. Being lied to be him only pissed him off even more. He wanted to get off this bed and track him down. Have a rematch. Because that fight was bullshit. And so was the result. At least, that's what he thought. How he felt was completely different. Kasuki felt something he never wanted to feel again. Weak. He hated this feeling. It had been so long since he's felt this that he almost forgot about it. Ever since his quirk appeared. He's felt and acted completely different. Like he could do anything. Like he could beat anyone. That's one of the reasons he wanted to beat All Might and become number 1. Right now though, it felt like that was impossible. That fight he had with Deku, it made him realize something. Even though he had this badass and strong quirk, he still lost to Deku, who was seriously injured for whatever reason. He threw everything he had at that shithead, and he still beat him. Well, that loss weighed heavy on his mind. It was what that bastard said that really pissed him off. Go home, Kakin, I don't want to hurt you. I may be hurt, but I'm not the same Deku. Go home. You know what, between the two of us, I think I'm stronger than you. Katsuki's hands began to smoke a little. His scowl only deepened as he remembered those words. All of them came from Deku. That piece of shit. It pissed him off that worthless shit had caused him to feel this way. He wanted to kill that bastard, but he felt like he couldn't. Not after what happened. He wasn't an idiot. As much as it pissed him off to admit it. What Deku said might be true. He wasn't the same. He saw those scars and injures. He saw what quirks he had. Well, the ones he saw anyways. There was no telling what else that bastard was hiding. If he wanted to get another shot at Deku, he would have to be ready. But how? That's when he remembered something that shitty nerd said. You're strong, Kakin, but you are not stronger than me. Well, you've been doing a bit of training. You haven't reached your full limit. Deku was right. Sure, he's worked out and jogged here and there. Even practiced using his quirk. But never really proper training. He was of course going to do a regiment right after he graduated from that shitty school. So he could join UA, but now all that seemed to change. If he wanted to be no point one and kick that nerd's ass, he needed to get serious. I have experience and power on my side. And to be perfectly honest, I haven't even reached my full limit. Katsuki let out a growl as he remembered that. The look on that bastard's face. He couldn't wait to see Deku again. With a newfound determination and a bit of anger, Katsuki brought his fist up into the air. I swear I'll be number 1. Katsuki roughly stated as he clenched in teeth. Deku, you bastard. Next time it won't be me on the ground. Count on it, you fucking nerd. Wherever Izuku was. Whether he was in jail or still on the run. Katsuki would see him again. And their encounter won't end like last time. An hour later with All Might. It's been an hour since All Might talked with Inko and checked in with young Midoriya. Where he leaned the tragic tale of how Inko met Izuku's father. The man called Siller. Something the all-powerful hero was still trying to process. But right now he didn't have the time to do so. Why? Because he was rushing to the UA conference room. Where Izuku's fate will be decided. The chief of police would be there, along with a few government officials. Mostly a few judges and other people. The whole UA staff and a few pro-heroes will be there too. Normally this wouldn't take place at a high school. But unfortunately they didn't want to take any chances. Better to have Izuku close if he would to try anything. They still didn't have a definite idea of his quirk. And what other quirks he may have. All Might was zooming through the halls of the school at high speed in his hero form. Quickly trying to find the conference room. He seemed to have forgotten the room number and time of the trial when he was checking on Izuku. It was kind of embarrassing really. Since he was technically a part of the UA staff. Well, not officially anyways. Darn it, All Might really needed to find this room. He knew there was only one conference room. He just didn't know where it was. After what seemed like a good 20 minutes, it looked like All Might found it. With a mighty yell, All Might opened the door and rushed in like a blur. Am I late? Everyone in the room looked towards the entrance of the room. And saw All Might. With what seemed to be a forced and worried smile. From what All Might could see, the so-called trial of Izuku seemed to have just started. Which was very fortunate. All Might looked around to see Nezu along with Aizawa and a few of the UA staff. He also saw some of the government officials the government sent. They were sitting near Kenji Tsuragami, the police chief. Who looked like a human with Beagle's head. Standing right next to him was All Might's friend. Naomasa the detective. That wasn't all he saw. A few pro-heroes were present that weren't a part of the UA staff. To start off small, he saw Native, Death Arms, Backdraft along with Mount Lady. They were only there because they were the ones who confronted Izuku when he escaped. The major power he saw in the room really surprised him. All of whom were ranked heroes. Like him. He saw his old friend and fellow hero Kugo Sakamata, better known as Gang Orca. The number 10 hero. Next was Shinyu Kamihara Aka Adshot. Sitting next to him was one of the heroes who confronted and helped capture Izuku. Blue Genist, who looked very bored. Last but definitely not least was someone All Might never expected to be here. Denji Todoroki, the man also known better as Endeavor. Japan's number 2 hero. His ambitious and prideful fellow hero and rival. Who wanted nothing more than to surpass him. Even if it meant hurting and alienating his family. But that's a story we'll catch up more on later. Late as always, All Might. Endeavor callously stated with a scowl. He then shook his head lightly. Pitiful. All Might nervously laughed as he straightened up. Sorry about that. I was busy out talking with a close friend. All Might said, trying his best to look natural. It wasn't really a lie. But it'd probably be for the best his talk with Inko remained in the dark. Soon All Might coughed a little as he walked over to the long and circular table. Anyways, am I too late for this mock trial? A few of the government officials felt offended by this. None of them were expecting the #1 hero to say such a thing. Many of the heroes remained quiet. The exception being Nezu, who kept on smiling. Of course not, my friend. Nezu stated rather happily and perky. We were just about to begin. All Might didn't show it, but he was relieved. Very relieved. He still had time to try and put his plan into action. Also to say his piece. Good, that's good. Because I really need to say something. All Might stated, still smiling. But that stopped when he stopped at the large table. With everyone's eyes on him. We all know why we're here. We're here to decide the fate of someone. I rather like to have this done in a proper court, like always. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Mainly because some of you think this person deserves such treatment. Everyone remained quiet as they listened to All Might. A few couldn't help but agree with him. Many of course averted their eyes or tried their best to not look guilty or uncomfortable. I wouldn't disagree with you that Izuku has committed some serious crimes. Crimes that might seem unforgivable to you. He's hurt and done some terrible things. Few nodded with what All Might said. The rest silently listened. But we'd be fools to only judge on the bad he's done. And not the good he's also done. I'm not going to defend what he's been doing is right. No matter the reason, what he did was wrong. Though to blame someone for something they can't seem to control of would also be wrong. Now that immediately got everyone by surprise. More confused than anything. What was All Might talking about? What do you mean, All Might? Gang Orca asked. Yeah, you telling us that this kid has been hurting and attacking people because he was forced to? Vlad King asked in a rather unconvinced tone and expression. That seems very unlikely. All Might nodded. It would seem so. That is, if you knew anything about young Midoriya's quirk. All Might stated. Getting everyone's attention. I'm not going to go in full detail. Mainly because I promised someone to keep it that way. So, I'm going to cut to the chase and purpose something. This caught everyone by surprise. They've never heard or seen All Might act like this. Not even his close friends. And that would be. Kenji Saragami asked sternly, yet politely asked. The room got tense as All Might just stood there. Like he was preparing for something bad to happen. Which only made most of the people present anxious. Even a few of the pro-heroes. Because they have never seen or heard All Might act this way before. Eventually All Might took a deep breath and spoke. I want Izuku Midoriya to be placed under my custody and care. And be able to attend UA High School. Should he pass the entrance exam. The room immediately went dead quiet. No one said a word or even dared move. After what seemed like eternity. Someone finally spoke. Could you repeat that? Kenji Tsuragami asked, clearly stunned and confused. Meanwhile in New York City, New York, ever since quirks were made public, things have never been the same. Well, the first known account of quirks was seen in King City, China. That was a complete lie. Quirks have been around since the late 1940s, maybe even longer. Back then they weren't even considered quirks. Rather, special abilities. But that's a tale for another day. Right now let's go to the present. At a large mansion, in a big bedroom. A woman laid on a big bed hooked up to medical equipment and other things. The woman was frail and old with white hair. She had a calm yet bored demeanor. The television was on. Which was a large television, which was showing a news report. Not about some war or terrible villain or terrorist attack. It was about what happened last night in Japan, when the most wanted vigilante in Japan was caught. And whose identity was revealed to the whole world. And the world never changes. The woman murmured out as she sighed. Unfortunately. A minute later, the door of bedroom opened. The woman looked to see a large man walking towards her. He was big and a bit chubby, also a bit old. Not as old as the woman. He had short black hair with a bit of grey under on his face. Even though he carried himself in a aloof way. He was dressed sharply and carried a handgun which was holstered. When he made it to the woman's bedside, he sighed deeply. I see you've seen the news. The man said as he looked at the TV. He then turned to look down at the old woman who didn't look amused at all. Did you already know this would happen, Angela? Angela, better known as Angela Petrelli, smirked a little as she shook her head a little. You know that my dreams aren't always accurate, Mr. Parkman. Angela stated as she began to cough a little. After all, Peter along with Gabriel proved that to me a long time ago. Mr. Parkman frowned as he nodded. Still, do you think this kid is the product of your little project? Mr. Parkman asked, still frowning. It soon showed a photo of Izuku on the TV. The last thing we want is one of your children running around and causing mayhem. We don't need another Siller around. Angela noticed the contempt and venom in Mr. Parkman's tone when he said that last part. He had every right to. Both he and Siller had history. I'm afraid we may be too late. Angela bitterly stated with another cough. There are reports coming in from South America that people with powerful abilities going missing there. And a few days later they're found dead with their heads cut open. Mr. Parkman flinched a little as he clenched his hand into a fist. Are you sure it's really him and not you know? Angela stopped coughing and shook her head. It could be Gabriel or it could one of my children, as you like to call them. Angela said with a sigh. We better send a team to go check. I fear that if word got out to either one of them about this business in Japan, my dream will come true. Mr. Parkman nodded. His attention then went back to the TV. As it kept on reporting the news about Izuku. You didn't answer me before. This kid. Mr. Parkman started to say as he looked very closely at the picture of Izuku. Is he a product of Project Reborn? Or no? Angela frowned as she took a look up at the TV. You know, reading my mind would be easier than waiting for an answer. Yeah, but you're hard not to crack, Angela. Mr. Parkman said somewhat jokingly, getting a small smile from Angela. Come on. You know I'll keep on asking. The old woman sighed as she decided to come clean. He's not one of mine. It looks like Gabriel has been busy, Angela said with a small smile. That changed when she saw the look on Mr. Parkman's face. She knew that look all too well. It seems the boy has inherited his father's hunger. How unfortunate. At least he hasn't killed someone yet. Mr. Parkman said, getting an annoyed look from Angela. We should send a team to evaluate this kid's powers to see if he's a threat, Mr. Parkman suggested, causing Angela to groan at his request. What? Angela, you know this kid is going to be trouble. He's already put at least a dozen people in the hospital, with no hope of recovery. Angela just scoffed as he grabbed the remote of the TV, turning it off. She looked up at Mr. Parkman with a stern expression. Matt, let the local authorities and heroes handle this. From what we could tell, they got this under control, Angela stated, trying to calm Mr. Parkman down a little. But unfortunately it didn't seem to work. Angela knew Parkman, he wasn't just going to let this go. Tell you what, I'll call Hiro or Ando to check things out. They both owe me a favor. I'm sure they'll make some time to check things out. Being retired, you're bound to have time. Will that calm your paranoia down? Mr. Parkman gave a subtle glare down at the old woman, who glared right back. Not wanting to start something, Mr. Parkman sighed in defeat. He nodded, causing Angela to softly smile. But that stopped when she began to cough again. This time, however, it turned into a coughing fit. Mr. Parkman quickly tried to help Angela, but stopped when she raised her hand. Eventually she stopped, but looked very tired. I don't have long, Matt. Even with all these doctors, experimental drugs and treatments, I'm on borrowed time, Angela bitterly said. Still, even though it sounded dark and hopeless, that didn't stop the old woman from smiling. I wish Nathan was here to see what the world has become. I wonder what he would think of it. Matt Parkman frowned sadly as he looked at his boss, Angela Petrelli, an old woman who was very old, who's been around for a long time. She, along with her family and friends, tried their best to keep the existence of Quirks under wraps. Sadly, all that seemed for nothing. She lost many friends and family because of this, notably her eldest son, Nathan Petrelli. I'm not sure what Nathan would think of this world, Angela, but I know he would do anything to make sure that it kept on spinning. Angela softly nodded. Matt was right. A brief moment went by and Angela turned to Matt. Send Renee and one of Noah's boys to South America. It might be a waste of time, but we can't take any chances. Whether it's Gabriel or not, we can't let these murders continue. Matt stood up straight and nodded. He then began to leave, eventually leaving Angela alone. My dreams, I really hope they're wrong, Angela softly said as she tried to go to sleep, but couldn't. All because of a certain dream she had. A dream that was more of a nightmare. She saw a city in ruins and in flames, hearing the screams of terror and yells of anguish, seeing countless people on the ground dead or dying. That's not all she saw. She saw a young man with freckles and green hair. He was smiling as he was covered in something. He was covered in blood. And it wasn't his blood. My dreams, I really hope they're wrong, Angela softly said as she tried to go to sleep, but couldn't. All because of a certain dream she had. A dream that was more of a nightmare. She saw a city in ruin and in flames, hearing the screams of terror and yells of anguish, seeing people on the ground dead or dying. That's not all she saw. She saw a young man with freckles and green hair. He was smiling as he was covered in something. He was covered in blood. And it wasn't his blood. With Izuku, a few hours later, all our young hero vigilante felt was pain. All he saw was darkness. But that wasn't all. He felt something else. He felt at peace. For the first time in a long time he felt at ease. Sure, there was pain, but it felt good. It felt normal. But the small-grown Izuku began to slowly open his eyes. He saw that he was looking up at a white ceiling that looked like it belonged in a hospital or nurse's room. Izuku felt groggy, a bit of pain, but that was minor. He also felt like he was laying on something soft, like a bed. That wasn't all. When he tried to move his right hand but found out he couldn't, he looked over at his hand and found out why. It was because he was handcuffed to his bed. Suddenly Izuku realized what was going on, and what had happened. No, Izuku softly said with a regretful expression. He closed his eyes and shook his head, hoping that this was all a bad dream. Sadly it wasn't. This whole thing was real. God, what have I done? Images of last night started to fill Izuku's mind. The way he stalked and almost attacked that poor woman. His encounter with Eraserhead, which eventually turned into a fight that involved Kamui Woods and the rookie Mount Lady. Heroes he looked up to. He attacked and seriously injured one of them. Hell, innocent civilians got into the crossfire. Thank God no one got seriously hurt. At least, he hoped no one got hurt too bad. What he remembered about last night was sketchy at best. When his hunger isn't fed or satisfied, controlling it is impossible. Sure, he could fight it off, like he did when he nearly attacked that woman. But there was only so much he could do. There were two events last night he remembered well last night. The first was his escape from the police station, which resulted in his newest and nasty injury. His burn from that molten hands guy. And the 3 new quirks he borrowed he only got to use 2 recently, but he had an idea what to do. After that his control began to return and his hunger went away. What happened after that was something he would never forget. His fateful and regretful fight with his former best friend, Kakin. Izuku slowly used his free hand to cover his eyes. Soon he began to softly cry. His worst fears had happened. His quirk had gotten the better of him. He almost did the unthinkable last night. He almost went against his promise. Not to hurt anyone innocent. He attacked and injured the very heroes he strived to become. He fought and hurt Kakin. Even though they weren't friends, it still hurt. I'm a monster. Izuku cried out softly. No, you aren't young Midoriya. Izuku stopped crying as he quickly moved his hand to look where that voice came from. He looked at the far end of the room to see a frail and skinny man with baggy clothes staring at him while he was leaning against a wall. Izuku unknowingly jolted a little in surprise. He thought he was alone. But apparently not. Who are you? Izuku nervously asked with a shaky tone. The man chuckled lightly as he walked over to Izuku's side, where he took a seat on the nearest chair. Afterwards the man sat there staring at Izuku, who looked even more nervous. Who was this guy? Izuku didn't know why, but something was oddly familiar about this guy. Like he knew him from somewhere, though he just didn't know how. Izuku took a look at the man's eyes. They were dark and a blue piercing color. Finally Izuku decided to focus on using his main quirk, which would probably help him figure this guy out. It was a bit risky considering the hunger that came along with it, but he'd already satisfied it. Usually after he took a quirk, it would be weeks before he would get the hunger, since he took 3 last night. He hoped that would satisfy it for a while. A green-haired hero vigilante focused his eyes on the man, analyzing the man from head to toe, causing him to raise an eyebrow. A second later Izuku gasped as his eyes and mouth widened in shock. All Might! Izuku screamed out in shock. All Might immediately grimaced in shock as he unexpectedly spewed out blood from his mouth, only making Izuku scream out in panic and more shock. HHHH. Boy, this kid has a sharp eye. All Might thought as he wiped away any blood from his mouth. His eyes then narrowed a little. Or was it his quirk at work? Either way, this kid has a lot of promise. As this was happening, Izuku was trying to calm down. Keyword, trying. All of this was a lot to take it. He had so many questions. Like why All Might looked the way he did, right? Was he sick or injured? Why is he here? Where was he? Where was his mom? Why wasn't he locked up somewhere? What kind of damage did he cause? Did anyone die? I bet you have a lot of questions. All Might stated as he crossed his arms. And I'm willing to answer them. This caught Izuku by surprise. Oh really? All Might smiled. Even in his sickly form, his smile shined brightly. He then gave Izuku a big thumbs up. Just like a true hero. Of course, young Midoriya. What kind of hero would I be if I didn't help all those in need? Izuku felt at ease more than a while ago. But he was still worried. He could barely remember what happened last night. Bits and pieces of what he did. He needed answers. What happened after I fought Kakin? All Might raised an eyebrow in confusion. He didn't know anyone by that name. A second later he quickly realized that Izuku was talking about Katsuki Bakugo, the young man who Izuku fought with. From what Aizawa told him, young Bakugo was fine. At least compared to Izuku's injuries. After your fight with young Bakugo, you attempted to leave, but you were stopped by Blue Genius and a small number of other heroes. Afterwards you attempted to escape. Thankfully I arrived just before you collapsed from exhaustion. Izuku didn't know what to say. So, he simply sighed and frowned. If you're wondering what happened to young Bakugo, don't fret. Last I heard he was recovering from minor injuries. He should be out in a day or 2. A green-haired vigilante looked up at All Might with a surprised expression, who smiled and nodded. Izuku's lips quivered a little as he looked like he was going to cry again. Thankfully he didn't. All he did was suck it up and nodded. Thank you All Might. Izuku muttered out. I'm happy to hear Kakin is alright. All Might nodded but looked down at Izuku with curiosity. It was quite strange to hear that from him, considering how that battle between them went. He's seen and been through many battles in his time. And from what he heard, those 2 boys were out for blood. If All Might was being completely honest, it kind of reminded him of his recent battle with All for One. Thinking that caused All Might to frown. He didn't want to think of young Midoriya and Bakugo fighting to the death. It wasn't right. Eventually All Might decided to lay those thoughts to rest. Right now he needed to talk to Izuku about what is going to happen to him. Midoriya, there is something you need to be aware of. All Might said rather seriously, getting Izuku's attention. As you already know, you committed a number of crimes last night. Very serious crimes. And I'm afraid these crimes only stack up to what you've been doing the last few months. Things look rather bleak for you, my boy. Most would look terrified or act hysterical after being told that, especially considering if they were in Izuku's place. Ever since quirks first appeared, Multiple laws were in place to deal with them. Many countries dealt with them in their own ways. Japan so happened to be one of the few lenient ones. At least that's what most thought. Several laws and procedures were in place to ensure the conscientious use of quirks. For example, during elementary school, children receive quirk counseling in order to learn how to use their powers responsibly. Public display of quirks are against the law, except in cases of self-defense, such as when one is under attack or preventing someone else from being attacked. Unregistered quirk users and vigilantes were a completely different matter. Unfortunately, Izuku fell into that category. Before pro-heroes and hero regulations were ever a thing, and the laws that would be made with them to help protect the population, a period of social collapse happened and an age of upheaval begun. Many individuals used their quirks in controversial ways, one of which was taking the law into your own hands. Yes, the origins of pro-heroes trace back to vigilantes. Some cases varied from individual to individual. Some used their quirks for revenge or personal gain. However, there were those who used their quirks for the greater good, like patrolling for criminals or helping those in need. From extreme accidents to natural disasters, these individuals unknowingly sparked a flame that would eventually cause the idea of professional heroes. At that time, though, they were considered lawbreakers. Still, laws back then involving vigilantism were pretty lenient. However, that completely changed when the governments of the world made the pro-heroes and quirk regulations. After the creation of the pro-heroes, many who were considered vigilantes gladly became pro-heroes, officially licensed to keep and enforce the peace, with the permission and full support of the government and law enforcement. Those who didn't accept the new laws or transition of becoming licensed heroes for the government either retired or would eventually be arrested. The world's government soon made vigilantes and the unlicensed use of quirks illegal and forbidden. Each country, of course, had differently laws and punishments involving vigilantes. Eventually, vigilantes faded into obscurity and were thought to be no better than villains or other criminal scum. Today, vigilantism is considered a heavy offense. In Izuku's case, he could be facing some serious time in prison. And that's just with one offense. During his time as the stalker, Izuku had committed multiple offenses. Sure, there were a few vigilantes out there, pro-heroes left alone. Vigilantes like Knuckle-Duster, Pop Step and Crawler. But the stalker was a completely different matter. As if that wasn't bad enough, our young hero was now also considered an unlicensed quirk user. Quirk registration and regulations were put into place soon after pro-heroes were created, in order to evaluate and in some cases help certain individuals' quirks. That's why many today are given quirk counseling at a young age. Unfortunately, even with these laws and procedures in place, there are those who fall or slip through the cracks. Some out of fear for their privacy or just because. Sadly, most of these people would eventually become villains in time. However, in rare cases there are those who are like Izuku. It's not impossible for a quirk to manifest late, even like Izuku's quirk. Though the nature of his quirk is what's going to cause problems for him. From what Izuku figured out is that his quirk was a mutant one. In the last few months of studying his quirk and any information on quirks in general, he could tell his quirk was special, very special, but also very dangerous. The last few months told him that much. The ability to copy steal quirks. That thought alone would cause fear. In this day and age, people care deeply about their quirks. It's what made them unique. Whether his was powerful or not, it was a part of them. A part of their identity. And the idea of someone taking that was frightening. Izuku sighed deeply. It's true what All Might said. Things looked very bleak for him. Still though, Izuku wasn't afraid. Well, maybe a little. But not as much as she should be. Ever since his quirk appeared, all he's done is cause fear and suffering. While many people he hurt deserved it, there were those who didn't deserve it. He's done terrible things. And maybe a bleak future is what he deserved. A small sad smile appeared on Izuku's face. It wasn't all bad. At least he had a quirk. Quite a number of them in fact. Even though how he got them was wrong. His time as the stalker wasn't all bad either. Well, many wouldn't admit, himself included. Izuku had stopped a number of criminals. All of them dangerous in their own right. How he beat them was wrong. But there were times he saved a few innocent people as the stalker. Yesterday being one of them. Even though he was the one who caused the danger. As the stalker, he was not a hero. He didn't deserve such a worthy title. Heck, being called a vigilante was too good for him. At least that's what Izuku thought. But he did save people at times. Sometimes from things most would consider worse than death. Our young hero remembered an instance where he saved a young woman from being raped. And another when he saved a man from being killed during a mugging. Those who were committing such crimes were targets of his at the time. All he wanted were their quirks. But when he saw such nefarious and unforgivable things, he couldn't sit by and just let them happen. But that didn't change what he did was wrong. Being a hero was all Izuku wanted to be in life. Even when he was told he couldn't. Or when Kaken and his friends would beat him up and told him to give up. He didn't waver, not once. When he found out he had a quirk. His very own quirk. He thought things would change for the better. His mom would finally be proud of him. His peers and teachers acknowledging him. Kaken, his former best friend, finally acknowledging him as an equal. Maybe even a friend. His dream of becoming a hero possible now. To be like his idol All Might. Unfortunately that didn't happen. He was ashamed, frightened even by his quirk. So much that he hid it from everyone. Even his mom. The person he trusted and loved out of anyone. Forced to indulge his hunger to protect her and everyone. Slowly after taking quirk after quirk from criminals and other scum. He wasn't a hero. Whatever punishment the government and police had in store for him, he would gladly accept it. However, there was something that was troubling him. What about his mom? What was going to happen to her? Would she be arrested too? For unknowingly sheltering a wanted vigilant? And if not, then what about the whole world knowing she was his mom? He heard a lot of people. People with friends and family probably not above revenge. What was going to happen? They all might. I'm okay with whatever punishment I deserve. Izuku muttered out with a small frown. I'll accept anything. But please don't let anything happen to my mom. All Might looked at Izuku in shock. What was he talking about? I don't care what happens to me. But please, my mom is innocent in all this. She didn't know who I was or what I was doing. I beg of you, even if you people aren't going to charge her, she'll still be in danger because of me. Suddenly out of nowhere, Izuku activated his Iron Mate quirk and broke out of his handcuffs, causing All Might to jump out of his chair and backed up. He didn't want to fight Izuku. But if he intended to attack or escape, he had no choice but to stop him. However, as All Might was about to transform, something unexpected happened. Izuku, still weak and injured from last night, slowly got out of his bed and fell to his knees. Now on his hands and knees he placed his forehead on the floor. He was begging. Still hurt from last night, Izuku did his best to hide the pain. Tears silent began to flow down his cheeks. Please, All Might. I don't deserve mercy or even have the right to ask you this. Please, my mom is innocent. All Might was at a loss. Here he had Izuku crying and begging on his knees. He could tell that young Midoriya was in pain. Yet he still continued. All for his mother's sake. For what seemed like forever, Izuku kneeled there, on his knees begging and softly crying. Eventually something happened. Izuku suddenly felt a hand grasp his shoulder. He slowly looked up to see his idol looking down at him, with a sympathetic look and smile. Young Midoriya, there's no need for this, my boy. Your mother is safe. No charges will be brought upon her. I also personally saw to it that she be placed under police and pro-hero protection. You have nothing to worry about. Nothing is going to happen to her on my watch. I promise. Izuku's whitened in shock. He couldn't believe it. Here was his idol, telling him that his mom was alright and safe. And that he personally made sure she was safe. That's probably more than anything a person has ever done for his mom. More than his father anyways. Oh really? Izuku timidly asked with a sniffle. Yes, my boy. You have my word, nothing is going to happen to your mother. All Might stated, still smiling. The same goes for you, young Midoriya. Izuku soon looked confused. What do you mean? Izuku asked as he wiped his eyes. All Might sighed a little, but was still smiling. He knew he had some explaining to do. You may want to take a seat for this, my boy. All Might said as he helped Izuku off the ground. Izuku then took a seat on his hospital bed, waiting for All Might to continue, which he did. You already know that you're in big trouble. And originally you were supposed to be placed in a maximum penitentiary for minors such as yourself. For how long would be anyone's guess, though it would be a long-term sentence for sure. Izuku began to feel a little scared. None of that sounded great at all. Also, given how your quirk works, or rather quirks if we're being specific, you'd probably be placed where we send most of our powerful and dangerous criminals, regardless of your age. Most likely to Naraka prisoner, maybe one of our secret ones. After hearing that, the life in Izuku's eyes disappeared and was replaced with a blank and darkened gaze. He wasn't scared anymore. He was absolutely terrified. He was expecting to go to prison. But hearing it and how serious it sounded terrified him. All Might noticed the look in Izuku's eyes and decided to continue. Before the poor boy has a panic attack. Don't fret, young Midoriya. Originally that was the case, but now you have nothing to worry about. All Might explained. You see, a few hours ago there was a gathering of higher-ups from the government, police, pro-heroes and staff from UA High School. Just us. No reporters, TV crews or journalists. I was also there in attendance. Why, you may ask? Well, we were all there to decide your fate. Izuku didn't know what to say. He was shocked but more confused. Why was his fate decided behind closed doors and in secret? Was it because he's the stalker? One of the most infamous vigilantes in Japan's history. Or maybe it was because of his quirk. There was no secret now that he could steal copy quirks. How he did it wasn't nice at all either. It wasn't surprising people would be afraid of him. Even the government and pro-heroes saw how much of a threat he was. Before you jump to conclusions and assume the worst, Midoriya, let me tell you what happened. You may want to get comfortable. This may take a while. Not wanting to question his idol or cause any more problems, Izuku got comfy and focused all his attention on All Might, who began to tell what went down hours ago. Alright, it had just been a few minutes since I arrived. and things kind of went nuts. Earlier today, the room where the trial of Izuku Midoriya, aka the Stalker, was in chaos. People were yelling and arguing on all sides, from government officials to pro-heroes, all because of All Might and what he said. Well, this is going just as I predicted, All Might thought with a small sigh. Right now the symbol of peace stood there, with his arms crossed behind his back. His expression was serious as he let the shouting and arguing continue. The only ones who weren't going crazy were himself, Endeavor, Aizawa, Nezu, Blue Genius and Namasa. Eventually All Might grew tired of all this because it was leading nowhere. So, he got everyone's attention by clapping his hands together. And with his strength it was loud enough to cause multiple birds outside to fly off in fear. The room was dead quiet as everyone looked to All Might. Thank you for quieting down and giving me your attention. Now, I know you all have questions about why I'm asking for such a strange request. But please, hear me out. Many looked around the room, seeing if anyone would object. No one did. It would seem the floor is yours. Nezu happily chirped with his signature smile. Go ahead, my friend. All Might smiled a little as he gave Nezu a nod. When I first became a pro-hero, I saw the world as many of us should, good and evil. For the longest time I've given so much to uphold the law and protect the innocent. I've lost friends and colleagues in this line of work. We all have. Why, you may ask? Because we're the good guys. We are the ones who uphold the law and keep the forces of evil from overtaking those who are innocent. And I truly believe that is what's right. Heroes, police and government officials sat there listening to All Might's words. Many of them couldn't help but agree with what he was saying. Being a hero or being in the police was dangerous work, but was necessary. Still many of them wondered where All Might was going with all of this. I was taught to do what's right. One would guess that's why I became the symbol of peace. I've stopped and fought many villains these past years. Some powerful even than me. Yet at the end I would somehow always emerge victorious. I put away many dangerous individuals behind bars. Because that's what's right. Simple as that. All Might suddenly stopped for a brief moment as he thought about his next words carefully. Finally he continued on. Yet when I look back on all the battles I've won and villains I've put away, I can't help but feel like I've done nothing more than keep this endless cycle going. All Might said softly with a small conflicted expression. Most of the villains and criminals that I held placed behind bars stay there. But there are a few who walk, and continue to abuse their quirks for their own agendas. In the end it feels like I haven't accomplished much as the symbol of peace. A lot of the people in the room were shocked to hear All Might's words. They couldn't believe that how All Might, the symbol of peace, felt. Many of the younger heroes in the room didn't want to believe. Same with the people from the government. However, there were few who pondered All Might's words. Aizawa, Blue Genius, Gang Orca and Endeavor being a few of them. Was he right? If so, then does that mean whatever they've accomplished as heroes meant nothing? For one certain hot-head pro-hero he just snorted and looked annoyed. If this going anywhere hurried along All Might. Endeavor harshly spoke out with an irritated tone. The symbol of peace smiled a little at Endeavor's response. Even though they were rivals. One-sided anyways. All Might respected Endeavor. What I'm trying to say is that I've talked to young Midoriya. Talked to his mother. Seen what he's done in the last 24 hours. He's a good kid, no doubt he's made mistakes. Some very serious mistakes. But that's because he can't control his quirk. Having awakened your quirk at such an age would take a toll on anyone. The boy needs help. Not to be sent to some god knows where prison. Everyone in the room had their own opinions about what All Might was saying. 3 or 4 agreed with him. Many however did not. Only because they were either afraid of Izuku or held the law in very high regards. Others were still on the fence though. Sure, what All Might was saying could be right. But that doesn't excuse all the things Izuku did as the stalker. All Might, what you have done in service for this country and justice as a whole is nothing sort of amazing. All of us are in your debt. A government official began to say in a professional tone yet giving All Might a condescending stare. But what you are requesting is simply impossible. Mr. Midoriya is criminal and unregistered quirk user. And will be dealt with as such. Well, most wouldn't say it like that. Least of all to All Might. Most agreed with the official statement. Though they didn't openly say it. Silence was all that was heard as everyone looked towards All Might, who had his head lowered a little. No one saw his expression. For a brief moment many could have sworn they heard knuckles cracking from behind him. Finally All Might looked up to stare at everyone. His expression was a complete opposite of what he normally had. His stare was cold and serious. It even caused a few present to flinch. That's rather unfortunate. All Might simply said with a grim tone. Still, I won't be deterred because you said no. Instantly the room grew tense. Like the air had gotten a bit harder to breathe. For some they either flinched or were shaking. Others like Nezu, Aizawa, Namasa, chief of police and top-tier pro-heroes, remained unaffected. In fact Nezu was smiling. I've given a lot for justice and the innocent. A lot for this country and its people. I would gladly give even more if needed. Because I'm a hero, the symbol of peace. But I don't have the right to call myself that if I can't help this boy. Izuku Midoriya, he may have done terrible things. But damn it. He deserves a chance to redeem himself. A determined yet frustrated scowl appeared on All Might's face. Something many have never seen before in their lives. Even Izawa and Endeavor were taken back by their fellow colleagues' shift in attitude. I was hoping it wouldn't have to come to this. But you've left me no other choice. Izuku Midoriya will be placed under my care and custody. In time hopefully he will be able to attend UA High School. It's not too late for him to change his path. I will save him. If you won't allow me this, then you all leave me no choice but to retire from heroics. Just like that, the room had gone dead silent. Fear and shock was all that anyone present felt. Even All Might's closest and trusted friends and allies were shocked by this. Was All Might serious about retiring? Hey, are you serious, All Might? Is he for real? This is nuts. PC can't do that, right? As everyone voiced their own opinions and worries, All Might had a serious glare. That was directed at the government officials. Well, something I wouldn't be proud of. I am dead serious. I love being a hero, not because of the attention or action, but being able to save innocent people so they could lead happy and safe lives. All Might stated as he clenched his fists. So please let me save this boy. Don't make me stop being a hero. Nothing was said after that. All Might stood there looking at everyone with a pleading look. No one knew what to say. This was unprecedented. Having a high-ranking pro-hero threaten to quit, especially over some random criminal. It's only worse because it was All Might. Of all people, why did it had to be the 0.1 pro-hero? For those close to All Might, a few had no idea why he was doing this. But they knew him well enough to know he was dead serious. Why, you must be joking, All Might. The same smug government official from earlier muttered out. There's no possible way you would retire over something so trivial. That was all Toshinori Yagiaka All Might could handle. In the blink of an eye, All Might used his super speed to appear in the front of the government official, shocking and frightening many. The official looked like he was going to wet himself when All Might glared right down at him. Does it look like I'm joking? All Might asked with a cold and soft tone. This is anything but trivial. The official did the smart thing as he shook his head fearfully. When All Might took a look around the room, many didn't say a word. Nezu along with Namasa were quietly smiling. All Might eventually turned towards Kenji Tsuragami, the chief of police. The one with the beagle head. Unlike most, he gave All Might a stern and calm stare. Technically the government could give Izuku to All Might, but it had to be approved by Kenji, which meant he was the only one standing in All Might's way. So, what's it going to be, Kenji? All Might sternly asked with his arms crossed. Kenji wasn't a fool. He, along with everyone in this room, knew what would happen if All Might abruptly retired. Anarchy, simple as that. Without the symbol of peace, villains and other criminals would come out of the shadows and raise hell. Law and order would mean nothing in a day or so. The public would be in panic and terrified. Riots would most likely happen. The heroes themselves would have a lot on their plate. Lives would be lost. Kenji was sure in a bind. Finally, after a good minute of thinking it over, the chief decided what to do. I must let you know that I am very against this, but it seems we are at your mercy. Kenji woofed out with a frown. I'll approve of it, but there will have to be measures put in place. A smile finally appeared on All Might's face. Of course, back to the present, and that's what happened. All Might was met with silence as he looked over at Izuku, who was speechless. The poor kid had a shocked expression on his face. It was a lot to process for him, even with his quirk. So many questions were going through his mind, but he was only able to ask one. Why would you do that for someone like me? A small smile graced All Might's face. Young Midoriya, why did you save those people? All Might asked. You could have easily escaped into chaos. Tell me, why did you do it? Izuku was taken back by the question. He knew why he did it. But was he brave enough to say it? After everything he's done, did he deserve to say such words? You know what I think? Our green-haired protagonist looked up to see All Might giving him his signature smile. His eyes were filled with pride. Surprising Izuku. You did what I truly believe you are destined to become, young Midoriya. All Might began to say as he stood up. Suddenly All Might began to steam a little, and then he grew in size. His baggy clothes now fitting him perfectly. No longer was he a sickly and frail man. Now he was powerful and muscular. The way the #1 pro hero should look. You did what any hero would have done. All Might proclaimed with a large smile and boisterous tone. That boy you saved along with all those innocent people didn't see you as a villain. Not even a vigilante. No, what they saw in that moment was a hero. Izuku was getting weak to his knees. Tears were soon visible coming down his face. He couldn't keep it in any longer. Here was his idol, telling that he was hero. Even after all he's done. It was too much for him to handle. Seeing the state Izuku was in, All Might decided to continue. There are stories about every hero. How they became great. Their bodies move before they have a chance to think. Almost on their own. Thinking of others' welfare than their own. You risked everything to save those people and that boy. Even in the face of danger, you had a real-live smile on your face. More tears were seen flowing down Izuku's face. His chest was tightening, his head began to lower as he held his chest. After all he's been through. Most of his life he was considered quirkless. Treated like dirt or looked down by many. even by his mom and former best friend. But that all changed when he discovered his quirk, though it came with a heavy price. He did horrible things because of it. He'd hurt and frightened so many people. Kaken, many people who were innocent and some who were not. The very heroes he dreamed of meeting. Izuku didn't want to do those things but had no choice. The last few months he let go of his dream. Because it all seemed impossible. All that he's done, it was rightfully so. However now it didn't seem so impossible. In fact, it was only at arm's length from him. For some reason, Izuku remembered something his mom said to him a long time ago. When he was told he was supposedly quirkless. "I'm sorry Izuku, I wish things were different." Those words weren't the ones he needed to hear back then. The thing he wanted. No, the words he needed to hear. "Izuku Midoriya, you too can become a hero." Izuku was now sobbing loudly. The words he needed to hear. Eventually Izuku looked up to see All Might extending his hand towards him. "Izuku, let me help you. And I promise you, you will become a hero." Time seemed to have slowed down for Izuku. Brief images of his life flashed before his eyes. Both good and the bad. His mom, Kaken, his bullies, the people he's hurt and saved. And for a second he could have sworn he saw a man. A man who he didn't recognize. Who was looking down at him with a loving and proud smile. He didn't know why. But he felt like he knew this man on a personal level. He just couldn't figure out why. Now, all Izuku saw smiling was All Might. He was waiting for his answer. "Well, what do you say?" At that moment Izuku made a choice that would not only change his life, but for those all around him. Maybe even change the world itself. Izuku reached out and accepted All Might's hand. From then on, nothing would ever be the same. Meanwhile, in a shack somewhere in the States, in a small shack in the middle of a desert, paintings of many kinds were sprawled on the floor, walls and even the ceiling. A man in a large coat was in the shadows painting something that was nearly finished. But that wasn't the strangest thing. What was is that many of the paintings present were eerily familiar. For example, one painting showed what looked to be a young Izuku being comforted by his mom. Another showed Izuku as the stalker being confronted Eraserhead. One more even showed Izuku accepting All Might's hand, which only happened moments ago. All of this was strange and a bit confusing. It only got more strange when the paintings close to the man were shown. Two portraits were leaning against a wall near the man as he finished the current portrait he was painting. One showed what looked to be Izuku meeting an old Japanese man with a beautiful-looking katana strapped behind his back. Izuku looked excited and starstruck by the man, who was smiling as he shook Izuku's hand. The next one was something more different. This time it showed All Might fighting with what appeared to be a black and large muscular monster. But that wasn't the most strangest thing. No, what was seen in the last and recent portrait was strange. It showed a bloodied and exhausted Izuku fighting a mystery person shrouded in the shadows. It looked like Izuku was on his last leg. What did it all mean? The man sat down on the dusty floor. His gaze was solely on the recent painting. He let out a deep sigh. "It's happening all too fast," the man muttered out as he looked at the painting one more time. His attention went on to Izuku, causing the man to frown sadly. "You have a long and difficult road ahead of you, my son." "It's happening all too fast," the man muttered out as he looked at the painting one more time. His attention went on to Izuku, causing the man to frown sadly. "You have a long and difficult road ahead of you, my son." A month later, Izuku was currently sleeping in a bed. He wasn't in his normal room. Heck, he wasn't even in his apartment. He was somewhere else. Right now he was tossing and turning under his blanket, as if he were having a bad dream. He looked frightened as he kept tossing and turning. The memories of these past few months. How he hunted and hurt the most deranged and immortal people he's ever encountered. Killers, thieves, arsonists, psychos and rapists. He's seen the worst of humanity these past months. He stopped muggings, stealing, killings and even a rape. It was horrible to see people use their gifts to commit such evil and disgusting acts. Why were such people given quirks like those? They didn't deserve them. That's why he took them. When he left them with their broken minds and bodies it felt right. Yet in the end it felt like it didn't matter. He only saved those people because they were in the way of his meal. His meal. What the hell was happening to him? Suddenly Izuku gasped for air and quickly sat up in a cold sweat. He looked around the room anxious. Like he was being watched or getting ready to get attacked. After a couple of minutes calming down, he sighed. "Man, it's like they're getting worse," Izuku told himself with a sigh. He pulled up his blanket and got out of bed. He walked over to his window. It's not even 6 o'clock yet. It's been a month since he got caught and arrested. A whole month. He should be in a cell in some prison for villains and psychos. But no, here he was in one of All Might's personal estates, which was basically a mansion. Izuku had been living here with his mom along with All Might on occasion, which was still kind of freaky and awesome. He was living with his hero. Of course there were many downsides. When he agreed to live and train under All Might, he thought it was going to be a dream come true. It wasn't. He and his mom were forced to live here, with a pro hero or two along with heavy security outside the grounds to watch him. Currently there was no hero here because of All Might. But when he would leave for business or for an emergency, they would send another pro to watch him. It wasn't great, as if things weren't bad enough. Doctors and scientists would come by to test him and monitor his quirks. One of the many measures put in place because of him. He was special apparently. His quirk was very rare, and the scientific world wanted to learn more about him, while most of the pros, police and government wanted to know his limits and strengths, in case he went crazy. A rather cold but needed measure. It also sucked because he couldn't use any of his quirks without proper supervision. The only time he got to use them is when he and All Might train or when the doctors and scientists were here. Our hero sighed again as he took a look down at his ankle, where he saw an ankle monitor. That monitored his every move and told his exact location. It even told them if he was using his quirks, if he even took a step outside the mansion legal grounds. The pro heroes and cops would be on him in minutes. So basically he was a prisoner. He couldn't go out anywhere. Not to school or the beach or parks. He still had to finish his schooling if he wanted to attend UA though. That's why he had a private tutor who's been teaching him. Personally picked by All Might. She would usually come around early in the afternoon to teach him. She was nice enough and didn't really fear him. A bit uneasy at times but nothing major. While not ideal, it wasn't as if he could go out if wanted to. He was outed for being the stalker. The big bad boogeyman that frightened thugs and other scum alike. People feared him, some hated or even loved him. Either way he didn't want any of it. He ruined so many lives. His mom's more than anyone's. Because of him she couldn't go out shopping, visit friends or see the world anymore. All because of him. People knew his identity. Which meant they knew who his family was. Because of what he's done he made his mom a target. He hurt and scared a lot of people. People who would want to even the score. What am I doing here? Izuku asked himself with a depressed frown. He looked at his room. It wasn't really his. It was one of many rooms in this big mansion. His mom was sleeping the one right next to his. All Might of course was sleeping in the master bedroom. Somewhere upstairs. This room was big, bigger than his old room. Yet it felt so small. Sure he had his stuff and belongings with him. All his All Might stuff and even his hero notebooks. His hero notebooks were very important. He wrote not just because he loved heroes or was interested in quirks in general. It helped him relax. Analyzing quirks in his own helped a lot. He didn't need to write such information because of his quirk. Izuku didn't like to admit it. But he was technically a genius. Give him a week's worth of college advanced books, and he'll finish them in a day or two. He was also a fairly good strategist. When he was the stalker he was able to defeat tougher opponents using his wits while being untrained with the quirks he took. While avoiding the police and heroes at the time. Too bad he wasn't as fortunate when Eraserhead found him. Things pretty much went downhill from there. I'm too awake to fall asleep again. Izuku muttered out as he rubbed his eyes. He then noticed another one of his notebooks laying on top of his desk. It was his new personal notebook that had all the new info he got on his quirks. Guess I can go over some things until everyone wakes up. With a small yawn Izuku walked over to his desk. When he made it there he took a seat and turned the lamp on. He looked down at the notebook which didn't have a title like his others. For one he didn't plan for it. Second he wasn't proud of it. He's done a lot of terrible things to get such quirks. It also told of the people he took them from. He didn't know much about most of them. But a side effect of stealing someone's quirk is that he got a bit of that person's memories. To say the least what he saw most of the time was unpleasant. So he wrote down what he saw and how he thought about such individuals. He also updated findings on their quirks. Well, his quirks now if you're being specific. Since the doctors and scientists been testing him. He's found a lot more about his quirks. His first quirk too. Along with their limits, side effects and strengths etc. Izuku opened the notebook and started to read. Starting with his first quirk. Evolved Intuitive Aptitude Quirk. Type. Mutant. Even when he was a little kid, Izuku knew he was special. Long before his quirk manifested. Turns out being in a life or death situation awakened it. He awakened it when he was getting mugged after walking home. Anyways, the way he's able to analyze people especially quirks was fascinating. At least that's what the scientists told him. Frightening was one they whispered at one point. Not surprising. His quirk allowed him to analyze things at a whole other level than normal people. He was able to absorb information at unbelievable speeds and remember them any time he wanted. He could also fix anything in a matter of minutes or even figure out problems at a high level. Reading and figuring out people was just as easy. When he first met Eraserhead and All Might when he wasn't in his muscle form, he deduced their true identities and quirks in an instant. Well, not All Might's quirk for some reason. He would have to look into that later. It all sounded wonderful, didn't it? Being a genius and a walking library. Izuku would have been content with that. Sure it wouldn't be flashy, but he still could have been a hero if he worked hard enough. Unfortunately his quirk was more than that. He had the ability to copy quirks. Or steal them. He really didn't figure which was which. After getting a quirk the person he got it from would go into an unresponsive vegetable state. So whether he copied them or stole them was up for debate. From what he gathered and have been told. His type of quirk was extremely rare. A mutant quirk at that. Which meant it was always active. There have only been 2 cases where a person can forcefully steal a quirk. At least from what he's looked up. Him and the quirk serial killer Siller. his father. Shocking. No, it wasn't hard to figure out. It made sense. From the rumors and limited reports online, it was the only possibility. Though it was strange how his quirk didn't work the same as his. From what he's heard, sailors took quirks by cutting up their skulls and analyzing their brains, killing them in the process. Izuku, thank God his quirk wasn't like that. What he did wasn't ethical or legally right. But killing, that's a line he hoped he would never cross. Though given what his quirk's only side effect compelled him to do, it was hard to tell. The hunger, as he liked to call it. His quirk had the need to seek out more knowledge. Books only helped little by little. Guess that's why he's been such a bookworm as of late. No, after he accidentally took someone's quirk, he knew what he needed to do. He craved for quirks. The idea of doing what he did to the one who tried to mug him scared the hell out of him. Not only because it sickened him, but because when he did it, it felt good. Like a rush. At that moment he never felt more alive. That's what scared him. He never told All Might, the doctors or the scientists this. Not even his mom. How could he? That's not all that scared him. Whenever his hunger feels unsatisfied, he can't control himself. At one point he almost attacked his mom when she was sleeping. His own mother. That's why he did what he did as the stalker. To protect those close to him. Even Kakin and his classmates. In the end all he did was make things worse. Blaming everything on fate or even his parents would seem easier. But he wasn't like that. Sure, it was mostly his dad's fault in the first place. He inherited his quirk from him. Yet he's never met the man. Well, he felt a bit of anger and abandonment from him for leaving him and his mom. It was in the past. What matters is right now. Recently he's been meeting and working with Dr. Chiyosha Zenjiaka, recovery girl. All Might brought her to meet him to help him. From understanding his quirks to the hunger. Something she's been studying a lot of since they met. This past week he's been on a few treatments to repress his hunger. And so far nothing bad has happened. At least nothing like usual. The treatments were mostly therapy with recovery girl or psychiatrist. Or taking medicine used for schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It's been a month and the hunger hasn't returned. Usually it'd be a few weeks when it comes around. That's why every couple of weeks he hunted. So far nothing yet. He hoped it was the treatments working, but he had doubts. Especially after a few incidents this past month. Evolved intuitive aptitude, from what he's gathered all but one of the limitations his father had don't affect him. Like information overload or forgetting said information. But the obsession to know more has affected him. Maybe even worse. Since working with professionals he's on the path to learn more about his quirk. Even learning to repress his hunger. More time needed to know more. Pacify quirk. Type. Emitter. Izuku remembered how he got this quirk very vividly. A mugger by the name of Izuku Ichioro ambushed him in an alley when he was walking back home. He found himself in the air as Izuku had a knife out, threatening to kill him if he didn't comply. Normally Izuku would have done so without question. Shaking in fear that whole time too. But that didn't happen. His body acted on its own and he struggled. Eventually Izuku had to let him go. At the time Izuku was suffering from heroin withdrawal. So he wasn't as strong as he should have been. That's why he was mugging Izuku in the first place. To get some money for his addiction. After being freed Izuku tried to run at first, but he was stopped by Izuku, who almost stabbed him with the knife. Somehow in the scuffle Izuku overpowered Izuku and did what felt natural. He grabbed Izuku's head and proceeded to use his quirk on him. Which at the time Izuku was unaware of. When he was done Izuku fell to the ground, unresponsive. Horrified and shocked by what happened Izuku quickly ran home like his life depended on it, leaving Izuku in the alley. Eventually Izuku found out how his quirk worked. Then found out he had Izuku's quirk. Which was shocking to say the least. The ability to levitate objects, people among other things and pacify quirks. A powerful quirk to have. So why was Izuku mugging people to feed an addiction? Well, when Izuku searched through parts of memory he took from Izuku, he got his answer. His whole life Izuku was abused by his parents. Sexually abused by his father at times. Growing up he was abused and told he would never achieve anything. Which didn't help his education so he was forced to drop out. Eventually he ran away from home and lived on the streets his whole life. Drifting from town to town stealing or mugging. He would catch his drug habit later in life. From what Izuku saw Izuku has never really killed anyone. Maybe hurt them but never killed any of them. He was just a guy down on his luck. It was kind of sad really. No one helped this poor man when he was a defenseless child. No heroes, police or teachers at the school he went to. Maybe if they did his fate would be different. He'd probably be a hero or successful person in life. Now, he was a vegetable with no hope of recovery. Izuku couldn't take back what he did. So he promised himself that he would use Izuku's quirk to do good. Just like he should have. Well, that was the original plan. Before his hunger. Pacify, the ability to levitate objects, people and etc. with their mind. Also has the ability to nullify quirks of people when holding them. Very similar to Eraserhead's quirk. Limitations are that this quirk could only handle so much. If not careful one will suffer bloody nose along with headaches, body aches and pains. If using past safe limitations, Izuku would most likely pass out and suffer long-term effects. Originally, Izuku could only lift a ton, maybe half. Lifting multiple things or people were hard but doable. He did lift bits of a collapsing building for a good couple of minutes. Pacifying quirks weren't hard. His limit was probably at 3 or 4 people. Since training and help from All Might, scientists and doctors, his original limitations have changed. He could now lift a whole ton with no problems. His focus was getting better too. Pacifying quirks was getting a bit easier too. Now he could hold and pacify a dozen people if needed. Given time, All Might told him his quirk would only get stronger. With proper time and training, of course. Only concerns were the headaches and bloody noses, which only happened when he overused his quirk. Currently he could only active this quirk twice or 3 times a day. So those limitations remained. More time needed to know more. Toxic Haze Quirk. Type: Emitter. Originally named Haze Breathing and Exhaling Quirk. Izuku thought it'd be best for a name change. The original user, a rapist by the name of Ichio Itsuka, wasn't much of a thinker. In fact, he was a disgusting idiot who stalked young high school girls. When he took his quirk, Izuku didn't get much like most. Though he did get glimpses. What he saw was horrible. Ichio was a serial rapist who targeted young women, even little girls. 7 times he was almost caught, but wasn't. All because of his quirk. Izuku was a peaceful and timid person by nature, who would wish harm onto most. But Ichio, when he took his quirk and watched his eyes become unresponsive, it felt great. Ichio was an animal who needed to be put down. Even Izuku thought that. Yet he still held on to his promise. No killing, even though that animal deserved it. It kind of sickened him when he had to use his quirk. The idea of using a quirk that has done so much harm appalled him. Yet he used it when needed. Izuku found Ichio a week before his identity was compromised. Ichio was going to rape a young girl in the smoke-dark alleyway at night. Izuku luckily found him before he could do the act. Ichio used his quirk to knock out the girl. When he saw his chance, Izuku attacked and overpowered him with his pacify. What happened next wasn't nice but felt good. After getting Toxic Haze, Izuku called the cops on the girl's phone, and made sure she was safe when the cops would come. He quickly vanished after that. From what Izuku learned, Toxic Haze was a curious quirk. The ability to exhale a toxic gas wasn't something new. But this one was special. When breathed in by anyone, the haze would instantly knock someone out. Another thing was that this quirk allowed him to breathe most toxic gases, even smoke. It also worked well as a smokescreen when needed. The scientists used things from tear gas to chlorine on him, and he really remained unfazed. Toxic Haze, the ability to exhale and breathe toxic gas, even smoke. While not fatal when breathed in, the haze would render anyone unconscious. Izuku could use this quirk actively when needed. All he needs is to have enough air in his lungs. Limitations were that if out of breath he would exhale nothing, though would still be able to breathe toxic gases no problem. Also, after recent use, Izuku found out his breath would be horrible for a few hours. Note to self: have Tic Tacs and gum, maybe even toothpaste and toothbrush on hand. Really not knowing a proper way to train with this quirk, Izuku and All Might thought to leave it be. For now. More time needed to know more.